As shops open up again, how do we all stay safe? Fontaine runs a craft store.
We've made the shop COVID safe. If you can't keep 2 meters apart, make sure it's 1 meter with extra precautions. Know the number of customers allowed in at any one time. Use the hand sanitizer at the entrance and use contactless payments. I'm loving serving customers again, but please, to keep us open, we've all got to keep to the guidelines.
Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Worldwide, Bloomberg Radio, Paul Sweeney and Tom Keene. I know, Paul, you're going to do a data check here into the break, but, Paul, I don't think you and I can go off air until the NASDAQ 100 goes down. And again, within your data check, the NASDAQ 100 is not going down this morning.
No, it isn't. We got, kind of a mixed kind of opening here. Feels a little bit quiet here. The S&P up about, less than 0.2%, 5 points. The Dow Jones Industrial is essentially unchanged, down 7 points, Tom. Just not much going on at 25,000.
The NASDAQ 100.
962. I'm looking at it, the overall, in that NASDAQ up again, about 0.7%. 10,732 on the NASDAQ, Tom. And, those 6-7 names that we talk about time and time again continue to power forward. It's not just professionals. I think it's the retail investors.
Oh, really?
They recognize that, if I want alpha, I got to be in these 6 names. That's as simple as it gets. I don't need to pay 2 and 20 for that.
I'm looking for the proverbial entry point, and the answer was March 20th.
Exactly. Looking at the Treasury yields, Tom, kind of quiet there. We have the 10-year Treasury up about 4.30, pushing that yield down just slightly to under 0.65%. The 2 years at 0.15%. On the 2-year. Crude oil hanging in there. WTI, Tom, hanging in there at about $40.61 a barrel, remaining pretty solid there. Looking at gold, still $1,820 an ounce on oil, gold right there. So, kind of the commodities hanging in there. Maybe we'll chat with Mr. McGlone at some point to get his thoughts on the commodities. The VIX, Tom, your vaunted VIX, in just slightly below 28. 27.74 on the VIX, getting back to kind of a little bit more of normalized levels. This is Bloomberg.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology, makes innovation happen. The university helped biomedical engineering professor Tara Alvarez launch a startup that may revolutionize vision therapy.
Our startup through NJIT is called Ocular Motor Technology. We create virtual reality vision therapy in a head-mounted display. So it's gaming, and basically we're sugarcoating the therapy so that children and young adolescents don't even realize they're doing therapy. To accomplish this, we need biomedical engineers, which are here on NJIT campus, computer scientists, artists, people that are into story development, and then we're collaborating with a lot of the large pediatric medical centers. This idea of a startup culture is extremely important to not just NJIT and the National Science Foundation, but also to the U.S. as a societal whole.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Not completing high school is more of a social thing than it was an academic thing. I came out in the 11th grade. Nobody was embracing you. The kids were cruel. It was very difficult to be gay. Even though all these years have passed, I still had that longing to have my diploma. The hard part was determining that I was going to do it, but I definitely didn't do it alone.
At age 30, with the help of her mentor, Carissa finished her high school diploma.
I have a mentor, Maria. She convinced me to continue my education and to finish what I started to get my diploma. Just never judges. She's a true role model. If you're even considering getting your high school diploma, go get it. You can do it.
No one gets a diploma alone. If you're thinking of finishing your high school diploma, you have help. Find free adult education classes near you at finishyourdiploma.org. That's finishyourdiploma.org. Brought to you by the Dollar General Literacy Foundation and the Ad Council.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this rainy weather. and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree, you get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
London. Toolstation are here to help get your job safely started and finished, with over 60 branches within the M25. All open with social distancing and contactless click and collect from 5 minutes. And with 20,000 top trade quality products to choose from. Order online now for collection in London branches and get £5 off when you spend over £30 with the code LON530. So, get your job started at toolstation.com. Terms and conditions apply.
At Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. U.S. stock index futures are trading modestly higher. Dow futures are lower, though. This is after a larger-than-forecast fall in initial jobless claims reassured investors about the recovery of the world's biggest economy. The dollar is slipping. Treasuries are nudging higher as initial jobless claims fell by 99,000 to 1.31 million in the week that ended July 4th, beating estimates. Continuing claims dropped to 18.1 million. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg. Right now, S&P futures, they're up 4 points. Dow futures down 22. NASDAQ futures up 74. The DAX in Germany's up 1.5%. 10-year Treasury up 4/30 seconds, yield 0.64%. Yield on the 2-year, 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1% or 39 cents at $40.51 a barrel. COMEX gold little changed at $18.20 an ounce. The euro, 1.1341 against the dollar. British pound, 1.2659, and the yen at 107.25. And Walgreens Boots Alliance plans to cut about 4,000 jobs in the UK following a sharp drop in its business there and suspend stock buybacks as the coronavirus pandemic jolts its business around the world. Its shares are down 5% in early trading. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Karen, thanks so much. Much to watch for here through the day. And, of course, we'll look for the market checks by Karen Moscow on Bloomberg Radio and a number of political events as well, including the Vice President's speech. Right now, it is front and center. I'm sure the Vice President will address it, as will the President today, as will Vice President Pence, I should point out, and that is this continuing pandemic. You've been following it, the case dynamics, the death dynamics. Just recently, we started to see hospital supplies running low again. We get perspective from Jason Farley, the Johns Hopkins University.
Yeah, well, the CDC just came out with recent data. It was actually from 6 of 10 different states and local regions, and they used the blood supply, basically. So if you've had blood obtained for any particular reason in a commercial lab in the United States, in these 6 geographic regions, they took samples that were used for other tests and tested them for antibody. And what they found was that the increased actual prevalence of antibody positivity was between 6 and 24 times higher than current estimates. And so just really large estimates of population penetrance of this virus. And so what that means, however, is to be determined. We don't know how many people got tested and had already lost antibody. We don't also know how many people might have tested false positive, although we think it's a smaller proportion. There are people who can test false positive for antibody. So it's a really important data point, and it really tells us that we are missing still a lot of cases in the community.
So, Jason, so infections between 6 to 24 times higher rates of infection, what does that give us? Like 10% of the population could have already had COVID-19?
Yeah, well, most estimates are generally less than 5%, but when you look really at these numbers, you're really showing upwards of 10% in some localities. So it's really critical that people continue all of the non-pharmacological interventions, social distancing, mask wearing, and really just understand that a fairly large number of people in a geographic region have been exposed to the virus.
Jason, another, repercussion because of COVID-19 is that the student and exchange visitor program in the U.S. has been modified. So people that had a visa but now are on online courses have, I believe, been asked to maybe go back to the countries where they were initially from. Does that mean that this is also being used as an immigration policy?
Well, it's certainly putting restraint on the ways in which we in colleges and universities across the country can flex our programs for the fall. We had restrictions for the F1 visa program, the visa program that allows foreign nationals to study in the United States, loosened in the spring semester through the summer. We have now received word that that is not going to be the case for the fall, suggesting that anyone on a visa for academic purposes must attend face-to-face classes. They can attend at most one class that's fully online, which really hampers our ability to think about the ways in which we plan for the fall semesters. So, in other words, faculty, staff, students who are on F1 visas, the students in particular on F1 visas, must be in a classroom based face-to-face and not online. And it really does put universities in quite a pickle, frankly, when we think about the ways in which we can offer education to those students.
Jason Farley with the Johns Hopkins University, an update on the pandemic. This is Bloomberg Radio, as we are 7 minutes from the market opening. Much more coming up this morning as well. Paul Sweeney, one of the things that slipped upon us, and I thank Bank of America for jolting me on this morning, is in all of this crazy news flow, earnings still come out. And it's a great mystery. I want you to explain to our audience, on a conference call, what's the goal of analysts? What are they trying to get from a CEO and a CFO who don't want to look forward in this pandemic?
Right. That's exactly right, Tom. I mean, you think about, let's call it a 1 hour conference call. The first half hour is them simply regurgitating what came out in their press release about their earnings, which arguably is a huge waste of time, because
that's where you read on Duke basketball.
That's right. We can all read that, but they're trying to kill time, quite frankly. And so the real value is in that 1 or 2 minutes where they talk about their future guidance, their future outlook. That's important, kind of how they want to phrase that. But of course, the most important part of an earnings conference call is the Q&A session, and that's where analysts really try to dig into what are the drivers of the business going forward. What is management seeing going forward about some of the key metrics that drive their business, whether it's revenue or costs or end user demand and all those types of things. And that's what investors try to get some color on. So as they think about their earnings models going forward, they can have a little bit better, guidance. But it's a cat and mouse game, Tom. With Reg FD, the CEOs and the CFOs are loath to disclose anything that's not already disclosed in their statements.
You're just old enough to remember where routinely the sell side would look out 3 years and certainly had an obligation to 2 years. And then with the financial crisis, Reg FD and all that, maybe we started looking out 1 year or 18 months. What are we looking out now with these guys? 3 weeks?
Boy, yeah, exactly right. I mean, we had so many companies, Tom, remember in the last quarter, that just withdrew their guidance. I mean, we just don't know. And that's absolutely the case. They're not being cagey. They just don't know. And I think they're going to have a little bit more, certainty now, or a little bit more, I guess, just experience with the pandemic world, and that maybe we'll get a little bit more guidance. But I don't expect to see a lot of companies, venturing out guidance more than, a quarter or two with any certainty whatsoever. I mean, some industries are just kind of devastated when you think about leisure and travel and all those things.
The certainty out there, folks, is stimulus in the air. You heard from the Chancellor of the Exchequer in London yesterday at House of Commons. Of course, we've got President Trump, Vice President Biden talking stimulus of various shades. That number modeled out at $1 trillion, maybe out to $1.5 trillion, even more. We're looking for stimulus too. Paul Sweeney, Tom Keene. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Asset managers who seize change to launch new strategies, add distribution channels, or exploit new technology to re-engineer the investor experience are often rewarded. However, in an industry paralyzed with complexity, few act with agility or decisively. Few run their business strategically. Yet, the most competitive managers in the market know with the right partner and a flexible operating platform, you can. Go boldly toward change with SEI Investment Manager Services.
I'm Steve Meyer, president of SEI's Investment Manager Services. At SEI, we understand the emerging forces that will define success for asset managers and what firms will need to compete tomorrow. That's why we continually optimize SEI's global operating platform. If your business requires greater agility, our advanced technology, integrated best-in-class systems, and multi-asset expertise can be your catalyst for business transformation.
With SEI Investment Manager Services, you lead the charge in a competitive marketplace. Learn more at SEIC.com/seize change.
Business is constantly evolving. Is your financial printer evolving to keep ahead of the curve? At Command Financial, we are redefining financial printing by providing industry-leading expertise, leveraging technology, and honing processes and best practices. Every day, Command helps SEC registrants, as well as members of their working groups, including securities attorneys and investment bankers, prepare, file, and disseminate regulatory and disclosure documents, such as registration statements, M&A documents, and mutual fund prospectuses and reports. Command provides a full range of services to help you effectively complete your deal, meet your disclosure requirements, and achieve your shareholder communications objectives. Visit our website at commandfinancial.com and learn how we're evolving, not only with the times, but also with your business requirements. Command Financial, redefining financial printing.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this rainy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Here's to you that learned with homeschooling that your kids are smarter than you. Here's to all the self-taught banana bread bakers. And to you that rock that very questionable homemade haircut. Costa is giving £3 to everyone that missed us as much as we missed you. Get your £3 in the Costa app today and enjoy a coffee, cake, or snack on us. Go on, you earned it. Terms and conditions apply. For details, visit costa.co.uk/terms.
Ever wondered how people's postcode lottery works? Easy. Your postcode is your ticket. And every weekday it gives you the chance to win £1,000 or £30,000 every weekend. And every month players in your postcode could win a share of £3 million. Join in at postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 23rd of July to play in the August draws. PPL manage lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus. Conditions apply. Play responsibly.
Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119 and around the globe. The Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Good morning, I'm Karen Moscow, along with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney. The opening bell brought to you by SEI. Since its founding 50 years ago, SEI has provided investment managers and asset owners with robust infrastructure platforms and flexible outsourcing solutions. Go to SEIC.com/IMS. The S&P 500 is higher at the open, up 0.25% or 7 points at 3177. The Dow Jones Industrial Average little changed, up 5 to 26,068. And the Nasdaq's up 0.7% or 69 points at 10,561. 10-year Treasury up 3/30 seconds, yield 0.65%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 0.7% or 29 cents at $40.62 a barrel. COMEX gold little change at $18.21 an ounce. The euro 1.1344 against the dollar. The yen 107.23. Tom and Paul.
Thanks so much. Greatly appreciate that, Karen. Right now, what we're going to do is look at the equity markets, and there's lots to talk about. But before that, we want to talk to Eric Friedman of U.S. Bank about the reality that we're all facing. We've had a huge theme here. I really give Lisa Bromwitz great credit for this, of over the last 2, 3, or 4 weeks trying to get out front of this school story. And there's any number of shades to this, Paul, from nursery school and kindergarten on through. Eric Friedman has children of stunning accomplishment. They are the kind of kids where you go, really? Because he has not one playing major school sports. He has 2 playing major school sports, and we'll keep it, the schools and all that out of it. Eric, how's that going? I mean, there's going to be like no sports.
Yeah, Tom, Paul, great to be with you this morning. Thanks for those kind words about my kids. It's a challenge. I think again, our concerns are little in the face of what others are facing in this pandemic, but it's a big concern for us, obviously as parents, but also as investors, because the will to, let's say, reverse a full steam ahead type of approach to getting back to the workplace, getting back to school. That, especially in light of an election coming up, that could be a material issue. So we're actually concerned from an investment perspective about what could be a really sloppy couple of weeks, if you will. So it's certainly it's an issue that people are aware of, but it'll be upon us pretty quickly.
I mean, you give us great insight on this, Eric, and I think of Jeffrey Yu over at BNY Mellon, who had a great idea today on taking the concept of the multiplier across the GDP equation and literally bringing it over as a labor multiplier wrapped around this terrible pandemic. And it's if, one person's laid off somewhere, 3 or 4 or 5 other people are directly affected. How do you fold that idea into your equity market analysis?
It is a very multiplicative analysis, Tom, and you hit it on an earlier segment that as the foot traffic slows, as there's more of a delay, if you will, between now and the other side of COVID-19, that just makes our time horizon more concerning. Again, we are not anticipating a vaccine, not that we have any edge as to when production may start, but that is probably a second half of next year phenomenon. So the thing that, of course, we and every other investor is focused on is what does that bridge look like? And if that bridge needs to extend even further, if it needs to involve additional stimulus, if it needs to involve additional help to the labor market, that is actually not priced in the markets. And again, if we see a sloppy and tough return to work, return to school environment, we think there is some potential downside ahead.
All right, so given, Eric, that there might be some potential downside ahead as we try to reopen as efficiently as possible, what's an investor to do here? Do I stay defensive? Do I get more defensive? Do I just stick with the 6 stocks that Tom's ready to jump into the market and buy right now, the Amazons, the Facebooks? What do we do?
Well, Paul, the first thing that we've done, in fact, we did this yesterday, is that we've trimmed some of those winners. And specifically looking at large cap technology in the U.S., we think that scarce growth remains a theme investors will pay for. But we do think it's time to take some degree of profits on that on that particular trade. So specifically, what we've thought about is really trimming large cap technology, investing a bit more into U.S. small cap. We're still bullish on U.S. large cap versus international, specifically international developed. So think Europe and Japan. The emerging market story is really running to its own drum right now. Obviously, lots of headline stimulus in China, whether that's through news stories or currency movements. So we're more neutral on international emerging, but we do think it's time to start trimming some of those large cap tech gains, not exiting completely, but a good time to rebalance here. So, as an investor, we would not be whole hog into the furthest right part of the risk curve. We still think that owning, especially in fixed income, full faith and credit bonds, which is a phrase I borrow from Mr. Keene quite often, that's a great place to be. So owning long duration treasuries, owning high quality corporates over high yield, we still think makes sense. take your risks in the equity market as opposed to in the bond market. That's really the way that we're positioning clients right now.
So in the bond market, what's your view of credit quality right now? Are you starting to see some cracks in that? Because we may be a little bit early on that, but just wonder what your thoughts are.
Yeah, Paul, there's really a wall of maturities that will be playing out over the next 6 to 9 months, specifically in the energy market. And if you look at the marginal piece of credit, especially in high yield, it's typically tied to the energy complex in some way, shape, or form. Not every credit, but let's call it about a quarter of the index is. So our viewpoint is that default rates are probably, implied default rates are a little bit too low, meaning people are factoring a more rosy outlook than we think is appropriate. So that for us, from a high yield perspective, leads us to, again, be a little more interested in high-quality corporates, non-agency mortgages, things like that have cash flow and have cash flow value, but aren't as far dependent, if you will, on this maturity schedule. So, again, our viewpoint is that in terms of the bond market specifically, the places to really have capital are municipal fixed income, long-duration treasuries, as well as high-quality corporates. The high-yield area certainly has some carry attached to it, but, again, we're a little more concerned about implied default rates. We think it could be a little messier than what the market is predicting right now.
The messiness of this, it comes in any number of shapes. A headline coming out, folks, gives color to the exogenous shocks that can occur. This from Reuters. The United States readying federal contract ban for companies using Huawei. So there, Eric, is a tension of China, tension of this, I guess, trade war that we're in, which has become a technology war as well. Is the only solution to protecting yourself from this diversification? Or do you go the other way where you're less diversified, trying to avoid the minefields?
I think avoiding the minefields, Tom, is the right approach. And to your point, and you hit this very well in an earlier segment, that the China-U.S. relationship remains really, really key, obviously, and it's been more of a backseat issue. But as we get closer to the election, there's certainly the opportunity for China to push the envelope a bit, because both candidates will likely have to show some toughness versus China, but they also are very cognizant of what the economy may look like heading into the early fall. So, again, that gives us the idea that having some diversification certainly makes sense, but being really careful about what we would call one-way bets, and those would be what we call pushing further on the risk string than is necessary right now. So, again, we think that the most important way to express that view, Tom, is in the bond market, making sure that is full faith and credit, take your equity risks, and we think that's a good way to balance out the path forward for us.
Eric Friedman, thank you so much. U.S. Bank this morning there on some of the challenges ahead in the equity markets. With our news in New York City, here's Michael Barr.
Tom, Paul, thank you very much. President Trump says schools must reopen in the fall, and he's slamming guidelines from his administration on how schools can do this safely. Today, CDC Director Dr. Robert Redfield defended his agency's plan to update the guidelines, but is insisting it's not in response to pressure from the president. Redfield on ABC's Good Morning America also says it's not a revision of the guidelines, just providing additional information.
Right now, we're continuing to work with the local jurisdictions to how they want to take the portfolio of guidance that we've given to make them practical for their schools to reopen.
Attorney General William Barr says, yes, there's widespread racial profiling, but speaking to ABC, says he believed race relations in the country were good until May.
I think before the George Floyd incident, I thought we were in a good place.
Global news, 24 hours a day, on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts, more than 120 countries. Michael Barr, this is Bloomberg. Tom, Paul.
Michael Barr, thanks so much. It has been presumed
here we go.
Decisions made in September or in November, which get you through the new year over to bonus season in February, would be slammed forward. We see that now with breaking news on Wells Fargo. Our chief financial correspondent, Shonali Bassick. Shonali?
Tom, this is an astounding scoop from Bloomberg's Hannah Levitt. As we know, a lot of the banks said they would not be cutting jobs this year or in the middle of the COVID crisis. But as we know, Wells Fargo is not every bank. They've had a lot of problems in the last couple of years. And frankly, the bank has been pretty bloated. This is Charlie Scharf, the new CEO's first big move, and there's a major question on how the markets and how regulators.
From where you sit, and Shelley, you're so good at this, is it a new Wells Fargo? I mean, there was, we all know the history, and a lot of, I spoke to the CEO 6 weeks before the company blew up. Yeah. Is it a new Wells Fargo where we see this layoff plan?
There's a hope that there will be a new Wells Fargo, right? Because after so many issues we've seen with Wells, there needs to be change. With that said, this is an astounding stat for you, Tom. Wells Fargo generates more than $30 billion less than JP Morgan in revenue, but has more employees.
Yeah, that's well said. Well said. Compare and contrast is good. Do we have any numbers on this? I mean, it's reporting on what they're going to do, and we know the plans are coming. But can you give me any numbers, like right down to 2 decimal points?
It hasn't been. There's no target yet, but this could get pretty high, pretty fast. Remember, they have more than 200,000 employees, 260,000 employees. This could get into the tens of thousands pretty easily.
Yeah, I mean, you go, Paul, you go on a percentage basis.
Yeah,
Paul, to me, 2-3% is sort of a normal executive rationalization of costs, and this would be more than that, Paul Sweeney.
Yeah, it sounds like it. So that, the headline is Wells Fargo is preparing thousands of job cuts to start in 2020. So, Shonali, the returns for Wells Fargo, are they materially below their peers in terms of returns on equity and everything?
Yes. And remember, we have earnings next week also. The question of whether they'll be able to hold steady when it comes to profitability in the face of taking bigger loan losses. That's another issue they have to deal with. They have been consistently bringing down their net interest income in the face of these interest rates. So this is not just because of their own issues. Them being able to weather this environment is a big question mark.
Shonali Bassick, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate that this morning. There'll be much more on this. Very important. Hannah Levitt reporting again, as Paul mentioned, Wells Fargo readying thousands of job cuts in a key statement to start this year. The phrase used within our Bloomberg reporting, tens of thousands of positions may be affected. We'll have much more on that through.
The stock is off just about 1% here, Tom, and it's off 55% year to date.
I did not know that.
Yeah.
Wells Fargo's down 55% year to date.
I mean, the banks, all the big banks are, they're down 30, 40%, but Wells Fargo obviously bearing the brunt of it.
When you're in the triple leveraged all cash fund, Paul, you don't notice. I'll be honest.
That's shocking, isn't it? Yeah.
I genuinely did not know that. The Dow, negative 87 right now. SPX goes a little bit of red. You wonder if maybe that colored it a bit. NASDAQ 100, what can I say? Up 0.5%. This is Bloomberg Radio. Good morning.
This is a Bloomberg Pursuits look at luxury. Can you hear it? The stomp of soccer players passing down the floor to pitch. It's the sound of live team sports returning to ESPN, thanks to some technical hoo-ha, such as microphones embedded in the turf, fancy drones capturing the action from above, and super slow-motion replays from cameras behind the goals. Fan seats may be empty, but the match between the league's 2 Florida clubs, Orlando and Miami, will showcase new features that the Disney-owned network has been planning almost since the coronavirus shut down live events in March. A lawsuit by movie theater Big Three AMC, Cinemark, and Regal against the state of New Jersey is arguing that keeping cinemas closed while allowing stores, shopping malls, and churches to reopen is an unfair and unreasonable application of the coronavirus lockdown. According to the suit, theaters will be running in 45 states by the end of July, and silent cinephiles are at far less risk than singing and praising places of worship. I'm Andrew O'Day, Bloomberg Radio.
Elite advisory firms rely on BNY Mellon's Pershing to meet the needs of their most complex clients. Karen Novak, Chief Operating Officer at Pershing Advisor Solutions, explains how.
At BNY Mellon's Pershing, we bring customized insights and strategies to help you grow your advisory business and stay on the leading edge. We can support the needs of your most sophisticated clients with a full range of investment and wealth management solutions, from access to private banking to consolidated bank and brokerage custody. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength and high-touch service that BNY Mellon's Pershing can provide. Are you well positioned to stand out from your competition?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Brokerage custody provided by Pershing LLC and other services provided by Pershing Advisor Solutions LLC. Both members of FINRA and SIPC. Private banking and bank custody provided by BNY Mellon NA. Member FDIC.
Global
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. We fit car tyres for over 500,000 customers every year. We could fit yours at one of over 350 garages, or even on your driveway with our mobile experts, which means you can safely hit the road again and surprise that special someone.
Happy birthday!
From tyre fittings to MOTs, there really is no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
Breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm Karen Moscow. The S&P 500 lower, down 0.2% or 4 points at 3164. The Dow Jones Industrial Average down 0.4% or 112 points at 25,954. And the Nasdaq is higher, up 0.4% or 40 points to 10,533. 10-year Treasury up 7/32, yield 0.64%. The yield on the 2-year 0.15%. NYMEX crude oil is down 1% or 41 cents to $40.50 a barrel. COMEX gold is little change, down $1.10 at 18.1960 an ounce. The euro 1.1331 against the dollar. The yen 107.17. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Paul.
Karen, thanks so much. Greatly appreciate that. 7 minutes is a big deal. And it's a big deal that I never thought would be a big deal, Paul Sweeney. And it's about the president's tax returns. I mean, Paul, I don't want you to see my 1040 easy form because you know it's got that big interest payment from the triple leveraged all cash fund.
Sure.
It's back there in, capital gains losses and idiocy. And, we've all got our secrets, but you wonder what the mystery is here. We get a brief now from truly our expert on Supreme Court work, known nationwide. Gregory Storr joins us right now, and we have him for a brief moment here before he goes off to the 10 a.m. announcements. Look for that on Bloomberg Radio. Greg Storr, what's the mystery? I mean, do we know? What's the secret?
Well, we don't know whether Trump's accountants and banks are going to have to comply with these subpoenas. And because of that, we don't know whether his tax returns are going to come out in public. And we don't know what's in those tax returns because he's never released them, unlike every president dating back to Jimmy Carter.
I mean, is this like, remember, you guys are too young to remember this, but Geraldo had this huge deal where he was opening some door somewhere. I mean, is this going to be like Geraldo where, if he loses, he's got to show the tax returns, and guys like you or Tim O'Brien, our expert on this at Bloomberg Opinion, they go, well, that's a nothing burger. I mean, what is it?
Well, if I recall, I'm older than perhaps you think, Tom. If I recall, there was really next to nothing in that vault. There will be a lot in Trump's tax returns. It just may be hard for people to figure out, especially those of us who are not tax experts. It may or may not have some big smoking gun in it, but it will be very, very interesting to people like Tim O'Brien and anybody else looking into alleged presidential misconduct.
So, Greg, there's a couple of different cases here as it relates to the president's tax returns. Summarize kind of the two. I believe there are two cases.
Yeah, depending on how you count, there's 2 or 3, but there's House cases. There are 2 of those that were argued together, and there's a New York grand jury case. The New York grand jury case is a little simpler. It's about whether the subpoena has to wait until the president's out of office. Lower court said no, it could go ahead and go forward. The House cases are 3 different House committees saying we have a legislative interest in seeing Trump's financial records, those of his family, his businesses, a variety of legislative purposes, and Trump is arguing, hey, it's you're basically engaging in law enforcement, and you really can't do that when you're going after the president's personal records.
And so if we get, if the court rules that the president must disclose his tax returns, any idea what next steps would be, what the timing might be?
Well, so if it's a House case, so if it's a grand jury case, we're probably not going to see those because they'll still will be grand jury secrecy.
Okay.
If it's the House case, it sort of depends on Mazars, the accountant, and the banks, Deutsche and Capital One, how quickly they turn them over. They've said they'll comply. It's possible they'll wait for the court's formal judgment, which usually comes out like a month afterwards. And then the records, they turn them over, they goes to the House, and it will be up to the House committees what exactly they do with them, whether they release them publicly, whether they release just part of it, and all that. So, it will probably be at least a number of weeks before we see anything.
When they do the case, Greg, what was the room like when Mr. Trump's attorneys and I guess the Justice Department, whatever, when they were in there in the courtroom, what was it like as they talked about a given president's tax returns?
Well, Tom, this was one of those cases that was argued by telephone. So all I know is what was in my home office. It was in that set of May arguments. The court had never done that before. We heard the voices. If you were watching C-SPAN, we saw pictures of the people arguing and the justices, but we didn't have the kind of body language and audience reaction that we might normally have.
Okay, great. What was the language like? I mean, were there cute questions about, page 42, line 3? Or, what was the tone of those questions?
It was less confrontational than you might have expected. There was a sense in that argument, we'll see if it happens today, that the justices might be angling for a compromise ruling, or at least there was, everybody seemed to be recognizing there were legitimate interests on both sides, and they were trying to figure out how to square it.
Greg, so we're going to let you go. You got to get ready here. You're 7 minutes away from these important decisions. And Paul Sweeney, you and Vonnie will have that at 10 a.m. on Bloomberg Radio.
Yeah, we're going to have continuing coverage of this, Tom, at the top of the hour as these decisions are rendered by the Supreme Court. And, of course, these are just issues that have been, a challenge for President Trump really since the campaign, Tom. The calls for his returns started, obviously, when he ended the campaign, which is typical for folks that are running for the presidency. And then, of course, it's carried through the first 3+ years of his presidency.
Let me do a data check here. Paul, help me out here as you can. Oil, really pretty steady, $41 a barrel, West Texas. Crude, Brent crude rather, $43 a barrel. Gold was $18.20, even higher per ounce. Somebody said, is that a record high? And the answer is no. 2011, we got up to, depending how you look at it, call it 1880, 1880.
Okay.
So the language I would use is we're buttressed up against that record high. We're just not through it yet. And then in the equity market, Paul, I don't know what to say. We're down 100 on the Dow, SPX down fractionally. I guess it's fractional moves. But the NASDAQ 100 has a life of its own. Paul, can I state I've never seen that?
Yeah, I don't think we have, Tom. I mean, we talk about the lack of breadth in the market where it's literally, concentrated in a handful of names. We all know those names, and they've been there front and center for years now. Really, I would argue coming out of the financial crisis, we've seen the market being led by the big tech names, the FANG Plus names, on the upside and the downside. That's what's really been driving this market. So you have to pull back and look at some broader indices.
Well, it'll be interesting to see. Again, we're waiting for a set of Supreme Court decisions. It is that time of year, and we'll have much more on that here really looking for maybe 6 minutes away as well. Just as importantly, after claims today, which came in pretty much on track, 1.3 million, a horrific number. We're also looking for the details and the nuance of Vice President Biden's speech on economic policy from Scranton, Pennsylvania. So it's a mixed market today. I should note strong renminbi as well. We are produced by Richard Truman. This is Bloomberg. Good morning.
Jenny Liss, Jewish...
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
How do we control coronavirus now? This is Scott. He's a nurse.
NHS Test and Trace helps stop the spread of the virus in our communities. If you've got symptoms, even mild ones, get a test immediately. Don't leave home for any other reason. If you test positive, we can trace the people you've been in contact with and contain the virus. So get tested and protect each other.
To get a test, go to nhs.uk/coronavirus or call 119. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
Thanks to National Lottery players, the Emerald Centre are now providing emergency food supplies and support for people in Bedfordshire like Alan. Thank you. And £600 million of National Lottery funding is on its way to thousands more local projects in England and across the UK during these exceptional times.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. The National Lottery. Your numbers make amazing happen.
Whoa, just got a Moonpig reminder that it's your birthday Saturday.
Yeah, I set that up.
Oh, do you know what? I forget one time. Okay, I'm in the app.
Oh, the romantic card section.
I'm full of surprises. Now, what rhymes with babe?
How about just uploading a nice pic? No, wait, I'm not ready.
Hey, I love you from every angle. Now for the gifts. Oh, and flowers.
Heartfelt can happen anywhere with Moonpig.com. Download the app now.
On the Media heads to Montgomery, where a new memorial to lynching victims asks us all to face this country's past.
I think people realize, yeah, something bad probably did happen. And they don't want to acknowledge it because they're afraid they're going to be punished for it. I have no interest in punishing this nation for its history. I want to liberate us.
On this week's special episode of On the Media from Alabama. Listen to the On the Media podcast on TuneIn today.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
We're all guilty of spending too much time on social media. Why not add something genuinely useful to your feed with TuneIn? Follow at TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn about some of the best stuff happening around the app. You might just discover your next audio obsession.
Staying current on college hoops starts here. On the Eye on College Basketball podcast, CBS sports columnists Gary Parrish and Matt Norlander bring you commentary, insider information, and statistical analysis covering the entire NCAA.
The amount of earning potential you could have had there, or if you had gone to play at any other place with a chance to play in the NCAA tournament, win a national championship, none of us would have faulted Cunningham for doing that, but he decided this is where he wants to be in the face of a postseason.
Search Eye on College Basketball on TuneIn to listen.
World 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Markets with Bonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney.
How do you kind of view the volatility in the marketplace here?
The harshest downturn for American workers in history.
Companies across the board forward across industries, really trying to shore up their balance sheets.
There's very, very disturbing dynamics at work.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
There's only so much that you can speed up vaccine development. Because of all the dislocations, there's always relative value trades that you could be doing.
This could be a U-shaped recession rather than a V-shaped recession.
It's the uncertainty, I think, that is really spooking everyone.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Vonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Good Thursday morning from New York City and points beyond to our worldwide audience. Coming up, we're going to take a look at those Supreme Court decisions that we expect to break sometime in the 10 o'clock hour. Most importantly, the decisions from the Supreme Court on President Trump and his tax returns. Does he need to disclose them publicly? Plus, we're also going to dig a little bit deeper on those jobless claims numbers that came out today. A little bit better than expected, but still stubbornly high. But first, let's go to Greg Jarrett of Bloomberg News for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg.
Stocks are mixed, Paul, as investors weigh the larger than forecast fall in initial jobless claims with concern that an increase in the pandemic will derail the world's biggest economy. That would be us. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. S&P 500 is little changed. The Dow's down 0.3%, down 74, and the Nasdaq's up 0.6%, up 64. The 10-year is up 7/32 with a yield of 0.64%. West Texas Intermediate crude's down over 1% at $40.49 per barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.1% at $18.80 per ounce. The dollar yen 107.15. The euro is $1.13.25, and the British pound $1.26.55. You like faux meat, fake meat, often cast away to the grocery store's refrigerated aisles. Seems to sell much better when moved to the high-traffic meat department. Consumers purchase 23% more plant-based meat on average when the products are moved to the traditional meat aisle. This according to a study conducted by Kroger and supported by, of course, the Plant-Based Food Association. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett. Now we continue. Vonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney, Bloomberg Markets.
Greg Jarrett, thank you so much. We are still waiting on the Supreme Court decisions to come out. They'll be out in the next few minutes, and we'll have analysis and context. Until then, let's bring in Dave Wilson to talk to us about markets, and Matt Bosler, our crack Fed reporter, to talk to us about initial jobless claims falling, but still more than 18 million continuing claims. Matt, let me come to you first and ask you what exactly we should read into these numbers.
Yeah, so we're definitely not seeing much of an impact so far as we can tell from this sort of, resurgence in coronavirus cases across the South and the West. And that was evidenced in today's numbers, which, saw a slight decline in both initial claims and continuing claims. But as you point out, the numbers are still really, staggeringly high. And so, I think it's important to keep in mind, Thomas Simons at Jefferies makes a great point that we're not really seeing that kind of momentum in the claims report that we're seeing in the monthly jobs report in terms of a decline in unemployment. So that kind of suggests that, we're still in a situation where unemployment is still very high and not making a ton of progress in coming down as the economy reopens in certain areas.
So, Dave Wilson, just looking at the stocks here, kind of mixed here on the morning. Anything jumping out at you on the back of this jobless claims as you look at the equities?
Well, you notice the consumer-related shares are higher, whether we're talking about the more discretionary companies, retailers, and so on, or the makers of consumer staples, food, beverage, tobacco. Maybe a standout in terms of the discretionary side is Costco Wholesale. They were out with June sales up 11.5% at stores open more than a year. And the stock's up 2.7% because analysts weren't expecting anywhere near that kind of an increase. So that's the plus side. The minus side is what we're seeing with Walgreens Boots Alliance down almost 8%. And the story there, you just had a lot of people putting off medical care and attention, as a result of the coronavirus. So their prescription sales in the U.S. were down. Their overall sales, pretty much in line with estimates, but earnings way below projections. They had a $2 billion write-off of asset values over in the U.K. where they own Boots. That's, that piece of the company. So when you put it all together, a number's just not well received.
Yeah, it's very interesting watching both the market and the economic data because, Matt, as you were saying, continuing claims down to 18.1 million. Conrad de Quadros saying that the magnitude of the gains in employment do not sit comfortably against the numbers of people claiming unemployment benefits. So we're seeing this sort of weird discrepancy. How are we supposed to explain that?
Yeah, so I think one thing to keep in mind here is that, you look at the continuing claims numbers, the 18 million, you add some of the kind of expanded coverage and some of the supplementary claims programs, and you get to a number like 30 million people on, jobless claims, unemployment insurance right now. And that really kind of highlights just how big of an impact the expanded unemployment insurance is having in terms of propping up personal income and consumer spending and the economy as a whole, and how important that upcoming decision that's being debated in Congress right now about whether to extend that expanded employment insurance at the end of this month is going to be in terms of the overall trajectory of economy. That's just a huge amount of money that, we're currently pumping into the economy right now through that program. And so I think that's going to be something that's going to be really key for the overall health of the economy here going forward.
Yeah, so, Dave, kind of following up on that, I mean, we had that first round of fiscal stimulus, the $3 trillion number, just a extraordinarily ambitious program, as Matt was just suggesting here. But now kind of waiting on a next round, if you will, and I think the number's being bandied about at around $1 trillion and maybe even some for state and local municipalities. How important is that for the market to get another round of fiscal stimulus this summer?
Well, it's a piece of a bigger puzzle, no question. To the extent that it allows businesses to sustain their sales and, you get the flow through to earnings. I mean, that's going to be something to watch for, especially with the consumer side. Again, I mean, the consumer discretionary category has been holding up relatively well this year. And, you have to figure that if people don't have as much money to spend down the line, that becomes an issue. In fact, you look through the S&P 500 this year, there are 3 out of the 11 main industry groups higher for 2020. Technology, no surprise there. They're leading the gains today as well. The communication services category, which includes Alphabet, the owner of Google, as well as Facebook. Again, sort of a tech element there, too. And then consumer discretionary up 12.5% this year. So, you have to figure people are anticipating that these companies will be able to sustain their business. And for many of them, it's going to come down to, how much money do consumers have to spend down the line? And if indeed the extended unemployment benefits don't come through after this month, as people may well be anticipating, that becomes an issue for the second half.
Dave, a story out just in the last few minutes that Wells Fargo is readying thousands of job cuts. Now, to put it into context, the San Francisco-based bank does employ 262,000+ workers. We don't know what kinds of magnitudes we'll see in terms of job cuts. The stock down 1.4%. The type of headlines we're seeing today with Wells Fargo, that's what we're going to be seeing over the next several months and into the next year or two, right? As companies try and get over this pandemic and realize that they have to downsize.
Yeah, I mean, you think about United Airlines coming out yesterday and saying, 45% of their U.S. staff, their jobs are at risk. So, yeah, I mean, there is certainly the potential for more of that. You look at the financial stocks in general, they're down today. I mean, all 24 stocks in the KBW Bank Index, for example, are lower. Wells Fargo, actually one of the smaller declines there. I mean, they have issues in terms of relatively low interest rates and not exactly the widest gap between, say, money market rates and bond yields. So that becomes an issue in terms of their ability to make money. They got to figure out ways to, sustain their business, sustain their profitability. And, at least in Wells Fargo's case, you have that possibility of job cuts as one way to that end.
Hey, Matt, when we take a look at the jobs data today, what do you think? How do you think the Federal Reserve is looking at this data? I mean, it's trending a little bit better, but it's still stubbornly high.
Yeah, so I think, the first thing is going back to what we were talking about just the overall impact of that expanded unemployment insurance and propping up consumer spending right now. That's going to be top of mind. The other interesting thing about today's report was some of the state-level data. So while overall claims declined, we saw that they actually rose in 23 states. So that overall number is masking quite a bit of divergence. And in particular, in some places where, the virus is really starting to hit the states hard again, like Texas, for example, we're seeing that uptick. And so uptick in claims again. And so that is kind of part and parcel of, some of these warnings we've been hearing from Fed policymakers lately about how this second wave of cases could, put the brakes on this national reopening once again. And that's something that everybody's going to be watching really closely in the coming weeks as we hear more anecdotal evidence that that's something that's starting to play out across the country.
What are the numbers that we should be watching for the best indication of how healthy the labour market is? Because, as you say, huge churn and huge geographic churn as well, Matt.
Yeah, I think these are going to continue. This weekly report is going to continue to be the most important number to watch, and in particular, keeping an eye on some of those states where the virus cases are really surging again. So we're seeing that in Texas. We're starting to see them really flatten out in places like Arizona. Where we're seeing them still decline is places like Florida and Georgia, which are also suffering, from a resurgence of cases and a lot of renewed business shutdowns and so on and so forth. So it'll be really interesting to see if, those declines that we're still seeing in some of those southern states are arrested here in the coming weeks. And I think that would be an important signal to kind of reinforce this connection.
Matt, I'm just going to break in, if you don't mind, because the Supreme Court has decided that the House can get President Trump's financial records. This was one of the decisions we were waiting for today, the last day of decision-making. The Supreme Court says the New York grand jury can also get Trump's tax returns. Now, these are two different decisions. The grand jury was the Vance case investigating whether the Trump organization falsified business records to disguise hush payments. And, of course, the Mazars one as well. The House was looking for Trump's financial records, and now the Supreme Court has released its verdict saying that the New York grand jury and that the House of Representatives can get Trump's financial records. Now, this is not the end of it. We'll see what happens from here, Paul, but the massive decisions coming out of the Supreme Court today will probably surprise many.
I think it will. I mean, again, this is something that President Trump has been adamant about in terms of keeping his personal financial records discreet and private. That started, obviously, the discussion started at the beginning of the campaign, and it's been, an issue really through the first 3.5 years of his presidency. It went all the way to the Supreme Court, and now it looks like there will need to be some disclosure by President Trump and his businesses as well. So this is a huge decision, and I think it's a huge win for those who demand transparency from the folks in elected office, particularly the highest office in the land there. So it's very interesting. So we'll have to see how this plays out in the response.
Yeah, really the import of this is that it will probably decide whether voters can see President Trump's financial records before the election. As we know, he's been very, very, unwilling to open up those tax returns and financial records, even as he suggests that there's absolutely nothing to see in there, right? So we'll at least now get the grand jury subpoena, which asked for Trump's tax returns, and that will be opened up, and we'll see what else after that. 5 subpoenas in total, by the way. 4 were from 3 House committees, and 1 obviously from the grand jury in New York.
Yeah, very interesting. We'll have to just see how this plays out. But this is clearly a major piece of news for those that are demanding disclosure. Let's bring in Kimberly Robinson. She's a Supreme Court reporter for Bloomberg Law. She can help us kind of parse through what we're hearing from the Supreme Court. Kim, thanks so much for joining us here. What's your key takeaways from what we've seen so far?
Well, this is a big loss, as you mentioned, for the president and his attempt to block access to these financial records, in particular his tax records, which he had famously refused to turn over during the 2016 presidential election.
Right, and we're getting headlines coming out bit by bit. Obviously, they actually get, hand delivered to the court reporters who then sort of, input it into the wire services and so on. But we know that we, for absolutely certain, have the New York grand jury verdict, and that's that the grand jury can get Trump's tax returns. And obviously, that's a massive decision. Kimberly, if a grand jury...
Okay, I'm placing an order to sell short euro at 113.35.
Probably in about 5 or 6 minutes, which deals with Congress, which would likely allow the information to become public before the 2020 presidential election.
So, Kim, how do you expect the New York grand jury to use the tax returns and the financial records from President Trump?
Well, the city says that it needs the records to investigate the president and his family members and Trump entities for violations of city law and state law. Basically, there was a New York Times report that had said that the Trump family had moved around a lot of money, hidden a lot of money from the city, and the city wants to investigate this, and that's how they plan to use these documents.
Order to sell euro removed. It moved too far. So I'll wait for another bounce back.
Face criminal charges while he is the sitting president. That seems pretty clear that that's something that the state cannot do. And it would really be after he is not president anymore, whenever that is, that the state would be able to possibly bring charges against him. But importantly, this is not just seeking information for him, but information from many other individuals. So it could be that we could see some movement in this, even if the president were reelected. We could see some of his family members or close companions seeing some repercussions from this.
So, Kim, what's the sense of timing here? We have the decision here. Is there a belief, is there a consensus within the legal community of how soon the documents could be turned over?
I'm not certain about when the documents could be turned over. I do know that all of the banks who were subpoenaed, importantly, these weren't subpoenas to the president, they were subpoenas to third parties. All of them have said that they will turn over the documents if the Supreme Court says that they should be.
And let's just say who these are. Mazars USA, of course, the accounting firm, his banks, that's the president's banks, Deutsche Bank and Capital One Financial. And the subpoenas were looking for years of the president's personal financial records, but also those of his family members, the Trump organization and his business entities, Kimberly. So there'll be a lot to go through when those documents are finally delivered.
There will be a lot, but, you know, this is the New York City District Attorney's Office, so they're certainly up to the task and have taken on investigations like this before.
It's interesting. The vote was 7-2, so pretty firm, I guess, consensus there among the Supreme Court. Kim, I mean, does this bode well or ill for, just presidents in general in terms of disclosure? It seems like this is pretty clear-cut that, what we've seen so far over the modern history of the presidency of you need to kind of disclose your financial records. This seems to be an affirmation of that.
Right, and it's really important to know that both of Donald Trump's two nominees, while they were going through their contentious confirmation hearings, really lauded similar rulings like this from the Supreme Court, notably against President Clinton and President Nixon, noting that the Supreme Court was unanimous in those cases and highlighting them as a win for the rule of law. So here we have both of those Trump nominees voting against the president, at least in this case, and we'll have to see whether or not they're on the same side when it comes to congressional cases as well.
Let's bring in somebody else into this conversation now. Legal analyst and, of course, host of Bloomberg Law, which airs weeknights at 10 p.m. Eastern. It's a must-listen. June Grosso joins us now. June, we have the decision then from the Supreme Court on the subpoenas. Take us through the May arguments, because there was a lot of questioning from many of the judges on both sides. So some of the Democratic appointees were asking questions that didn't make it obvious which way they would vote, and equally the Trump appointees.
Right, Vonnie, it was really difficult to tell from those oral arguments where the justices were going to go. Sometimes you think sometimes you don't, but there it was just a confusion. But what was clear was that the justices were more on the same page, were more amenable to the argument by Vance, the district attorney's office in Manhattan, because of several things. One, because this is grand jury secrecy. So remember, I don't know what Kimberly has already said, but this is a grand jury. So these documents, even when Vance gets them, when the district attorney gets them, are not going to be made public. The only time they might be made public if there's an actual criminal indictment in that case. So the justices are sure that this is going to be kept secret. They asked a lot of questions about about grand jury secrecy. I remember Justice Alito questioning whether or not you could really count on grand jury secrecy, or whether the newspapers and the media outlets would be able to get hints or be able to see the documents. So I think that was very important to them. Also, it was limited, and the attorney arguing for the district attorney's office agreed that it was a very limited document. He said there were boundaries to it, whereas with the congressional subpoena, which I'm still hitting my refresh button to see if the cases come out.
20 seconds, perhaps. We may get it at 10:20.
With the congressional subpoena, the lawyer who argued wouldn't give any kind of limits on what the subpoena could be. So I think that made a difference. Also, I just want to point out that if you remember, Justice Kavanaugh, who concurred here, was part of the Whitewater investigation. So he'd have to be explaining somehow how he could rule against this, but still take part in that broad investigation of the Clintons.
So, Drew, that kind of goes to where I wanted to go, which was, will this data really remain private as it relates to the New York court? I mean, it just seems like it's just, rife for potential leaks.
I actually think it will. I have a lot of faith in the grand jury system. This is such an important concept. The fact that when you go to a grand jury, it's secret, that everything that happens in the grand jury was secret. I can't imagine any prosecutor in that office breaking that rule. And I think that the grand jurors are, very, very much follow their secrecy oath. So I just can't see that it would leak.
As well, June suggests that would actually go to the main problem that the justices were having along electoral grounds. And actually, we're getting another headline: High Court largely backing Trump in-house financial record bid. So this would actually back what I've just said as well. The idea that, the House was seeking a lot of information. Some of that was pretty vague, and the Supreme Court seemed to be uncomfortable with that. Another headline: High Court orders tougher scrutiny of House's Trump subpoenas. So maybe this isn't over yet. Let me give those two headlines again. The High Court, that's the Supreme Court, largely backing Trump in the House financial record bid. It's telling the lower courts to reconsider the Trump subpoenas. So let me ask both of you, Kimberly and June, the Supreme Court is actually sending this back down to the lower courts. It wants the lower courts to reconsider the Trump subpoenas. What does that mean? They were very divided on the various subpoenas. Who wants to take that, June?
Well, I think what this means is, the first thing it means is you're not going to see these records before the election campaign, before November, because you think about how long it takes. They would have to be sending it back. They'd have to rebrief everything, and then a decision would have to come. So there's no way you're going to see these before the November elections. Then we'll see what happens as far as the elections, but it's going to be a long process. And this is what people were predicting, that this is a way, sort of a way out for the court. It's a middle ground for the court. Send it back to the lower courts. It's a way to sort of kick the can down the road. The court does this a lot. They issue opinions, and then they say, okay, take it, lower courts, you decide. And then sometimes it comes back up. But it's going to take quite a long time.
So, Kim, I want to bring you back in here, Kimberly Robertson. How do you perceive kind of what the court is trying to do here? Is this kind of a win for President Trump at this point?
Well, at least in the congressional cases, it seems like a temporary win, and a win on the objective of not having those financial documents leak before the 2020 election. But this is something that the Supreme Court does a lot. It kind of takes a middle-of-the-approach road that June was talking about, and kind of gives half of a win to one side and half of a win to another. So this is not surprising from the court.
I have to say something that's interesting,
June,
is that Chief Justice John Roberts wrote both majority opinions. And, as Kim and I have talked about, Chief Justice Roberts is in every 5-4 decision this court has come to this term. Chief Justice Roberts is the deciding vote. And here he wrote both of these opinions. I'm anxious to read them.
Yes, we're not going to let you go read them just yet, though. We have more questions. So Justices Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito dissented in the Supreme Court grand jury ruling, so I guess they didn't want even the grand jury to get Trump's tax returns, assuming that was sort of an overreach.
Right. There was during the oral arguments, and as I mentioned before, Justice Alito expressed, concern that these would be leaked. But during the oral arguments, there was also a very interesting questioning of the president's attorney, because the president's attorney, Jay Sekulow, went for this really broad immunity. He said the president is absolutely immune from criminal investigation even while in office. So that was this broad stance he took. So I'm anxious to see exactly where Thomas and Alito thinks the line should be, if they say. But it shows you, and also the 7-2. A lot depends on what Justice Roberts actually wrote in his opinion to see, you don't have the history, I don't see at the beginning, that you do in the in the other case, the Manhattan District Attorney's case. There was this long history he gave that presidents from Monroe to Clinton have accepted this ruling that the chief executive is subject to subpoena and have uniformly agreed to testify when called in criminal proceedings. So maybe that's the difference. But this is a huge separation of powers issue here, as I'm sure Kimberly said before, because the question now is, how much has Congress's oversight authority been stripped away?
So, Kimberly, what do you think the response is going to be or I guess, what do you think that are the next steps here?
Well, the next steps is that these cases will go back down to the courts from which they came, and there'll be a closer look at the House's reasoning for why it needed these cases. Again, these are just coming out, but it looks like the Supreme Court wants the lower courts to take a better account of the separation of powers problems that Trump is asserting here, and kind of do more work on that issue.
It's a win for Cyrus Vance, for the New York District Attorney. June, on precedent, what can the District Attorney do beyond just serving these subpoenas and serving these documents to the grand jury? Is there anything that he can use this as a precedent for?
Well, we'd have to see what happens. I think what's going to happen, he's already served the subpoenas. And these subpoenas, as you mentioned, are to third parties. They're to his subpoena actually is just to the accounting firm, and so the question is, they'll turn it over right away. They've said before that they're going to turn it over, so there'll be that turnover. They'll look at the information there, and then they'll start investigating. They have investigators. They'll start investigating what's behind it. If they find anything and as you mentioned, this is a huge amount of material that's going to come in. So they'll look at it, and they'll see if there are any other questions, what they might decide to do. I mean, grand jury has broad powers to look in directions that a normal jury wouldn't be doing. And so, as you probably heard the expression that, a prosecutor can get a grand jury to indict a ham sandwich. And so a lot depends on how much, and Vance is politically motivated, so a lot depends on how much he wants to push this grand jury, what they're going to do with that information. But you've got to know it's going there's going to be a lot of pressure on his office now, since he is the only office in the country that's going to have that information.
Kim Robertson, thanks so much for joining us. We're going to let you go. Kim Robertson, Bloomberg News, Bloomberg government reporter. We want to bring in now Josh Wingrove. He covers the White House for Bloomberg News. Josh, love to get your thoughts on how you think the White House is going to take in the information that we had this morning from the Supreme Court.
I mean, all eyes on President Trump's Twitter account. He is going to be upset. He views these things in binary win-or-loss ways. And, even though it doesn't look like these rulings are going to lead these tax returns to come out before the election, so I guess that, in a way, is a victory for him. He will not like losing, and he will, in particular, be dismayed that Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch have voted against him. He views his appointees as sort of his legacy, and I think will be particularly rebuked by that.
Yes, and I imagine there will be some vitriol directed at the district attorney, at the grand jury system, and so on. But ultimately, as you say, it is a win for him, and he'll probably spin it that way, in the sense that, once again, his tax returns may stay private.
Bonnie, if I may just say one thing, there's been a lot of debate about, how secure it is now to have a Supreme Court nominee. Let's face it, with these two last nominees, the conservatives thought they had decisions locked in. And we've seen several times this term that they don't have decisions locked in. And I think this case, the 7-2 decision, really will grate on them. And there's been talk of conservatives looking for an even better mechanism to try to figure out what kind of justices they can appoint.
Can I just debate with you for a second on that, June? Because how is this, unexpected? So obviously Supreme Court justices were having a problem just sort of giving Congress carte blanche into presidential records and all sorts of information that might be considered overreach from a constitutional point of view. But is the same thing said about a grand jury investigation, about a grand jury? I mean, that's private. It's very specific, it's very targeted, and it's a very different kind of, information giving.
True. And, I see the difference between them, but I also see that what President Trump is going to see and what conservatives who have been pushing to make the judiciary and specifically the Supreme Court more conservative are going to see is that two of President Trump's appointees voted against him. So they're going to look at it more in binary, very stark terms, not look behind the decision and sort of see the reasoning behind it. I think that's it. And also you combine that with a decision this year where Justice Gorsuch wrote the majority opinion in the decision that upheld job discrimination rights for LGBTQ people. And the fact that Justice Roberts also sided with and wrote the opinion in the case that upheld, that struck down an abortion law in Louisiana. So you sort of see, if you look at all the decisions, you sort of see the crumbling of the theory that a Supreme Court justice is going to stay in the lane in which, the people who appointed him think he should be in, or she should be in.
Josh, just real quickly here, I'm, like you, focusing in on President Trump's Twitter feed right now. How do you expect the official White House response? How's that going to play out today, do you think?
Well, they said that they hope they win the rulings. I don't think that they'll be obviously happy with it. Just on a couple notes, we alluded to earlier this push to change how these justices are selected. Trump has already pledged a new list. Remember, he put out a list in 2016 of justices he would choose from that was sort of galvanized support among conservatives. So he's already pledged that on the heels of that DACA decision last month that didn't go his way. And there was already before today simmering unrest in conservative circles, Fox News sort of media ecosystem around decisions around Neil Gorsuch and Chief Justice Roberts being essentially, viewed by sort of the farther right as turncoats, as traitors. And Trump has already been capitalizing on this, saying they need new justices. In a tweet last month, that's what he called for. So I think that he will continue. He'll maybe try to turn this into a re-election focus. Say, hey, we have a 5-4 majority, but it ain't working for us. We need more justices on the court.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for all of this. It's been a fascinating conversation and is only getting started now that we finally have the final Supreme Court decisions of the term, an extra elongated term because of coronavirus. And today were the final decisions from the justices and the ones that were perhaps most widely awaited all year. They were and are now that the grand jury can get President Trump's tax returns, but the House can't. At least not yet. The Supreme Court blocks House access to President Trump's tax returns. Our thanks to June Grosso, legal analyst and, of course, host of Bloomberg Law every evening at 10 p.m. Eastern right here on Bloomberg Radio. Our thanks to Kim Robertson as well, who joined us a little earlier, and also to White House reporter Josh Wingrove, who will be on this all day. Let's get a Bloomberg Business Flash now from Greg Jarrett.
Bonnie, stocks are edging just a bit down as investors weigh the better-than-forecast jobs data with concern that an increase in coronavirus cases will derail the world's biggest economy. We check those numbers every 15 minutes throughout the trading day. S&P is currently down 0.3%, down 10. The Dow's down 0.75%, down 196. The Nasdaq's up 0.4%, up 40. The 10-year is up 9/32, the yield 0.63%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 2.4% at $39.90 a barrel, while COMEX gold is little changed at $18.2140 an ounce. The dollar yen 107.13, the euro's $1.1329, and the British pound is $1.2651. Mortgage rates in the U.S. hit a record low for the 6th time since the coronavirus outbreak began roiling financial markets. The average for a 30-year fixed loan, 30.03%. That is the lowest in almost 50 years of data keeping by Freddie Mac. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Garrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Vonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
Bloomberg Markets is brought to you by Commonwealth Financial Network. Be the independent advisor you've always wanted to be with all the support you need to get there. Visit commonwealth.com to learn more. Well, as we're seeing, kind of a risk-on feel to the market here after that, extraordinary 34% decline at the beginning of the COVID crisis, a lot of folks are questioning, where do I go for opportunity, risk, reward here? Do I dip my toe in emerging markets? To get an answer to those questions, we welcome Kathy Hepworth. She head of emerging market debt at PGIM Fixed Income. So, Kathy, thanks so much for joining us here. Let's step back a little bit, and I'd love to get your 30,000-foot view of kind of emerging markets here. Where are we in the context of a global pandemic? Where do you see opportunities?
Sure, absolutely. So clearly emerging markets, fixed income broadly defined, and that takes into account emerging market credit, spreads, so hard currency sovereign bonds, local bonds, and FX were very negatively impacted in the first quarter. But there's been a really strong rebound in the second quarter, and in particular in hard currency assets, dollar-denominated sovereign bonds. They underperformed the most in the first quarter. And why is that? It's because that was indiscriminate sell-off in prices. The oil shock, as well as the growth shock and the confidence shock and liquidity shock, had really impacted not only emerging market sovereigns, but corporates in emerging market currencies. And the rebound that we saw is in part a function of the improved global liquidity, as well as the fact that things were significantly oversold. From a going forward perspective, we think that there's still really attractive opportunities in emerging market hard currency sovereign bonds, credit, that is, with spreads still being at the wider end of the range in a lot of the different sovereigns. Of course, in emerging markets, that includes the ratings distributions from single A down to defaulted bonds. So in that context, we think in an environment where developed market rates are likely to remain very low and investors are going to want to continue to reach for yield, there's still good opportunity in emerging market credit, in particular in sovereigns.
Let's just jump in for a sec, Kathy, and unpack some of all of that. You looked at 25 EMs particularly. What did you find in terms of ranking? And will it change as the arc of the coronavirus, shifts in these countries?
Yeah, so that's exactly, from a going forward perspective, that's what we need to take into account. And the lens through which to answer the question, which countries are most vulnerable to coronavirus, is to first say, well, which countries have the most direct vulnerabilities in terms of fatalities and in terms of their economies being susceptible. Then we have to look at, so which countries had pre-existing economic vulnerabilities? Where might there be countries where the fiscal situations were already vulnerable, so that to the extent that they have to spend more because of the economic slowdown, which countries are most vulnerable? Which countries are vulnerable from the perspective of the slowing global growth perspective? And then what are some mitigating factors? To what extent might policy response help? And the countries, when you look through all of those different lenses, the countries that appear to be the most vulnerable are countries such as Brazil and South Africa, as well as a few other Latin American countries, such as Mexico and Chile. On the other hand, some Asian countries, such as the Philippines and Thailand and Vietnam, tend to be the least vulnerable.
Interesting. Kathy Hepworth, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate your perspective on the emerging markets, some opportunities there for the intrepid investor. Kathy Hepworth, head of emerging market debt at PGIM Fixed Income. Interesting, Vonnie, kind of thinking about to what extent do investors want to go on that edge of the risk curve?
Yeah, exactly. Several countries mentioned there, South Africa, interesting as well, and we'll get back into more details, hopefully, on those ideas. We just scratched the surface there, really, with Kathy. All right, let's get A quick look at markets now. We have, during that time when we were a little preoccupied with the president, he is tweeting now. Let me read out what he is tweeting. The Supreme Court sends case back to lower court, arguments to continue. This is all a political prosecution. I won the Mueller witch hunt and others, and now I have to keep fighting in a politically corrupt New York. Not fair to this presidency or administration. I would suggest that that is pretty typical of the president to attack New York. He definitely wants to be accepted so much by New York and finds it difficult sometimes. Let's get now world and national news from Nathan Hager in our 99.1 studios in Washington, D.C.
Of course, the president is reacting, Bonnie, to a split decision from the Supreme Court on one of the most politically charged issues of the 2020 term, whether subpoenas for the president's financial records may be enforced. The justices have blocked access to House Democrats for now, sending their subpoenas to lower courts. Bloomberg legal analyst June Grasso says this means in all likelihood the president's records will not see the light of day during the campaign.
Think about how long it takes. They would have to be sending it back. They'd have to rebrief everything, and then a decision would have to come. So there's no way you're going to see these before the November election.
Meantime, the High Court says the Trump administration cannot block access to a New York grand jury. And as you mentioned, the president is calling that political prosecution on Twitter. The number of coronavirus cases in Florida has jumped another 4%. It's the fourth straight day below the 7-day average for one of the worst COVID-19 hotspots in this country. But deaths have spiked to a one-day record of 120. Hospitalizations are at an all-time high in the state as well, a record 409. And the positivity rate, the daily test positivity rate for Florida also is on the rise to 18.4%. The mayor of South Korea's capital is missing, and a massive search is underway. Mayor Park Won-soon's daughter says she called police after her father left a voice message that sounded like a will. Seoul's SBS television reports one of the mayor's secretaries had lodged a complaint that he had sexually harassed her. Global news on air and on Bloomberg. Quick Take powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries.
Imagine being denied an apartment because of your religion, or your race, or because you have children, or a disability.
It's so wrong.
Yes, but who has the power to stop this?
You do. Each of us has the power. The law is on your side. It's illegal for landlords to discriminate because of race, color, religion, sex, national origin, disability, or familial status. If you suspect that you have experienced housing discrimination, file a complaint with HUD immediately so we can investigate it. Fair housing is your right.
Use it.
To learn more, visit HUD.gov/fairhousing. That's HUD.gov/fairhousing. Or call 1-800-669-9777. 1-800-669-9777. A public service message from HUD in partnership with the National Fair Housing Alliance.
Why do hedge funds and other alternative managers rely on Pershing for a highly personalized experience? Mark Alderati, a managing director at BNY Mellon's Pershing and head of Prime Services, explains.
In today's fast-paced environment, where the only constants are change and volatility, you need a prime broker who's both steady and agile, focused on supporting your needs so that you can focus on growing your business and producing results. Exceptional client service and advocating for our clients is at the core of what we do. Our award-winning high-touch team is just one of the benefits of working with BNY Mellon. We help alternative investment managers create great experiences for their clients. Whether it's customized financing, securities lending solutions, platform access, or outsourced trading, BNY Mellon's Pershing is a prime broker who's committed to this business and dedicated to meeting your evolving demands.
To learn more about the unique and industry-leading solutions for hedge funds and other alternative managers, visit Pershing.com. Pershing, LLC. Member FINRA, NYSE, SIPC.
If knowledge is power.
I can find and fund my car, from a Mini to a Jaguar.
Feel good car buying from findandfundmycar.com is the place where you can find quality used cars from trusted dealers rated by you, and where you can fund your car with finance to fit your budget. It's feel good car buying, all in one place.
Shouldn't be a carry on, choose findandfundmycar.com.
What have you missed the most? A haircut? A visit to the shops?
Oh, you look lovely in that.
What about a nice lunch?
Fish and chips, please.
salt and vinegar with that.
Or an afternoon in a pub garden. Fancy a casual bike ride? Or perhaps something a little more intense? Or maybe you want a relaxing day out. Whatever you've missed, get out there and enjoy it again safely. Find out how at gov.uk/enjoy summer safely.
Eurotunnel Le Shuttle is a safer way to get to France and beyond, with social distancing built in. There's no scrum at security, hanging around for your bags, or shouldering strangers in your seat. With Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, simply drive on at Folkestone and stay in your car, comfortably. Then drive off 35 minutes later. Stay safe. Go Tunnel, Eurotunnel Le Shuttle, a safer way to France and beyond.
Ever wondered how people's postcode lottery works? Easy. Your postcode is your ticket. And every weekday it gives you the chance to win £1,000 or £30,000 every weekend. And every month players in your postcode could win a share of £3 million. Join in at postcodelottery.co.uk/radio before midnight on the 23rd of July to play in the August draws. PPL manage lotteries on behalf of good causes. 16 plus. Conditions apply. Play responsibly.
Are you ready to play?
This summer, ITV Hub is fully loaded with loads more full series.
Gonna get messy.
Yeah, like it's fuller than ever. From Love Island to Layer, we have divas lined up back to back.
Fill me in, sister.
From the GC and the Ibiza Weekender reps to the Real Housewives, it's round full of lots and lots of...
This is getting too much now.
Laughs, tears and smiles. It's crammed full with full series like Quiz, Flesh and Blood, Harry's Heroes and Manx in Mumbai. We've grown, expanded and just gone a bit extra this summer.
Give me some more.
ITV Hub fully loaded this summer.
The best experience possible.
Did we mention it's looking fuller than ever?
In line with government guidelines, face coverings are now compulsory on public transport. At Asda, you can get a 4-pack of Prima disposable face coverings for £2.80, or a 2-pack of washable face coverings from £2.50. Asda, we're all in this together. Selected stores subject to availability.
We've got some of your faves waiting for you on Just Eat. KFC, Burger King and Subway. Spend as much or as little as you like. No minimum spend here. We'll always deliver like a G. I mean, I would know. I'm pretty G myself, thank you very much.
Hear somebody say, Just Eat.
T's and C's apply. Selected stores and locations.
Hi, I'm an ad for Voxy, the mobile network with endless social media that doesn't eat your data. And I'm here to tell you that summer is on after all. Start that side hustle you've been talking about forever. Or throw a festival in your back garden and live stream it to the world. What are you waiting for? Stay connected, stay endless with Voxy, the mobile network with endless social media. Get 6 gig of data for £10 a month. No contract, cancel anytime. Voice and video calls excluded from endless social apps. Some general data required. 30-day rolling plan, 25 gigabyte roaming. Fair use and terms apply.
News 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks edged down with automakers among the worst performers on the S&P. The NASDAQ continues its streak of outperforming as SAP SE's better-than-estimated second-quarter revenue buoyed the outlook for tech companies. Investors mostly looked past better-than-forecast jobs data that showed initial claims fell by 99,000 to 1.31 million in the weekend of July 4th. Crude is sliding a bit after a key Libyan oil field resumed production, threatening to unleash barrels into a market where demand is already considered lackluster. We check those markets every 15 minutes with the S&P down 0.8%, down 26. The Dow's down 1.25%, down 324, and the NASDAQ is down 0.2%, down 18. The 10-year is up 12/30 seconds with a yield of 0.62%. West Texas Intermediate crude slides further. It's down 3.6% at $39.44 a barrel. COMEX gold's down 0.4% at $18.1280 an ounce. The dollar yen is at 107.25. The euro is $1.1298, and the British pound $1.2616. Now that's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
Bloomberg Opinion, informed perspectives, and expert data-driven commentary on breaking news.
Welcome back. A very interesting conversation coming up next now because it is time for Bloomberg Opinion, and a great opinion piece by the former chair of the FDIC during the great financial crisis, it should be noted, Sheila Bair. She is on everybody's lips. She's a household name, really. She's also founding director of the Volcker Alliance, which aims to build trust in government. And she is the founding chair of the Systemic Risk Council. Now, after her at the FDIC, the vice chairman was Tom Honig, who is also, of course, Kansas City Fed president. And they have a great opinion piece out on the Bloomberg today. or in recent days, banks' risks during the pandemic aren't clear. There is a lot to unpack here. So Sheila Bair, welcome.
Thank you for having me. Great being with you.
Talk to us about how risky banks are these days, because right now we're seeing headlines about, employees being laid off and so on, and we're not actually thinking too much, I think, about how strong fundamentally banks are. Didn't we fix that post-financial crisis?
Well, we did. I mean, they were certainly much better capitalized going into this crisis than they were during the great financial crisis back in 2008, 2009, but that's not saying much because they were really very highly leveraged back then. So we started from a low baseline, yes, lots more capital, which was good because they were in a much better position going into this. And that's in large part due to the reforms we put in place after the great financial crisis. So we shouldn't be overly confident, though. This is a very severe crisis, and capital levels have been declining, actually, leading into this crisis. The Fed over the last few years have been letting banks on average, distribute more in capital than they were earning, which depletes their capital levels. And so on a non-risk-weighted basis, we actually saw capital ratios declining for the last few years. So we shouldn't be overconfident. There was a bad trend going into this, which is unfortunate because usually when you're in a good economic time towards the end of the cycle, the smart thing to do is to raise capital, not to lower it.
So, Sheila, give us a sense of kind of what your takeaways were from the recently released stress tests.
Last year, those have grown significantly because of the crisis. And ironically, the Fed, this is something I supported back when I was chair of the FDIC and later as an advocate at the SRC, Systemic Risk Council, to require as part of the stress test to show that banks can expand their balance sheets and still have adequate levels of capital. Ironically, the Fed had done away from that. They'd weakened the stress test. That was one of the many ways they'd weakened it going into this. So the stress test results, which were firm specific, I don't have a lot of confidence in them. There were some numbers that were frightening, even though they were stressed under much more benign economic circumstances. As I said in my piece with Tom Honig, the leverage ratios were still quite low, which is a non-risk-weighted measure of financial strength of the bank. That one went down. Goldman Sachs actually dipped down to 3.5%. That was under pre-pandemic conditions. Then we had a sensitivity analysis that tried to incorporate pandemic conditions, but they didn't give us the leverage ratios. They didn't give us firm-specific results. So that's a long way of answering your question. We really don't know how safe these banks are. And if anything, I think the Fed, well-intentioned, but just created more confusion and angst about this. It was not a reassuring exercise.
Has a precedent been set now, Sheila, that the Fed will sort of backstop everything? I mean, the financial crisis backstops were supposed to be a one-off thing, but it does seem like the Fed will backstop anything these days.
Well, they are. They kind of, I supported intervention in the corporate debt markets. We had so many companies that were just barely investment grade. I was worried if they dropped into junk territory, they wouldn't be able to access credit markets anymore, debt markets anymore, and so that would exacerbate the layoffs. So I thought, there's a lot of problems with how we got to all those overlevered corporations to begin with, and some of them took on far too much debt. But be that as it may, I think it was the wise thing to do to intervene. But I was thinking more that they would do primary market intervention to help the companies as employers. The lion's share of the intervention has been in the secondary market, which also helps them issue new debt, but it really is more beneficial to investors. So it is concerning, and then they're not. I guess they just recently said maybe they're going to taper off a bit now. But the last thing we want is for everybody in the country to be too big to fail, because Jay Powell pretty much said we're going to backstop these markets And that had a tremendously beneficial impact for opening up corporate debt markets. But again, some of these companies probably do need to be restructured. They should be having a higher cost of capital, and to let this be, we should be trying to figure out a way to exit this now. There was a temporary jolt that we needed to provide to the corporate debt markets, but really they should be thinking about their exit strategy now.
Okay, Sheila, so bottom line, how concerned are you, or how concerned should we be about our nation's banks right here?
Well, I think we should be very wary. I think the leadership in Congress, instead of trying to, have election year deregulatory giveaways and pressure the Fed to do that, I think the pressure should be on the regulators to hold firm, suspend dividends. That's one good way to bolster bank balance sheets. $30 billion left FDIC-insured banks in the first quarter. That $30 billion that stayed on their balance sheets, it would have supported about $500 billion of expanded capacity and resiliency. So we should suspend dividends. We should be bolstering bank balance sheets, requiring new equity issuance if necessary. I mean, why take a chance? Nobody's going to criticize you for having too much capital in the banking system, but there's going to be a lot of adverse fallout for politically and, more importantly, for the real economy if this pandemic crisis turns into a financial crisis because banks start failing. So suspend those dividends, look at maybe requiring that they issue equity, the weaker ones, and that's the direction I think that the Fed should be going, and hopefully Congress and the Trump administration will stand down and let them do those hard decisions, or even better, support them and encourage them to do so.
Sheila, thanks so much for joining us. We really appreciate your perspective. Sheila Bair, former chairman of the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, giving us her thoughts on the banks. And, it's interesting, Vani, the banks came into this crisis in much better financial and capital position than they did the 2008-2009 crisis. But still, this is different.
It is different. Well, all crises are different, I suppose, right, Paul? But in the sense as well that some of the Volcker rule was rolled back just very slightly. But, this is the thing. This is creep. And, of course, in several years' time, how far will we have crept, and will banks actually be sort of, a systemic risk again? Yeah, and I think, as Sheila Bair pointed out here, it's better to be conservative here, as we are in kind of the midst of this pandemic and the economic fallout, rather than have a problem with the banks on the back end here. So we'll certainly follow up on that story. This is Bloomberg.
Everything seems to be in.
So I often struggled at school. Once, when we had a maths test, I looked around the room and everyone was just doing it. And I couldn't. And I began to cry. But my teacher came over and said, it might look like one big problem, but it's just a handful of small ones. And you can deal with that. I hear her voice in my head for every problem I face to this day.
Teaching. Every lesson shapes a life. You could get £26,000 tax-free to train as a teacher. Subject to eligibility, selected subjects only. Search Get Into Teaching.
Buckle up, race fans.
NASCAR is back in the driver's seat.
And you can cut straight to the action here.
With the Performance Racing Network on TuneIn, you can hear PRN's live coverage of some of this year's top events.
As NASCAR's top drivers, Kevin Harvick,
Clint Boyer, and more get back on the track.
Search Performance Racing Network to listen and see upcoming races. To help keep you and your loved ones safe, TuneIn has the latest guidelines from the CDC. Outdoor activities, wash your hands and don't touch your face. Stay at least 6 feet from people you don't live with. Wear a mask. Avoid shared surfaces like swings or benches. For the latest stories and updates on COVID-19, search Coronavirus News on TuneIn.
Wanna bet football can make you feel nostalgic?
Playing days are over, so...
On the podcast, NFL Alumni Lounge, Charlie Booth sits down with retired NFL legends to talk about their careers, life after football, and everything in between.
Mr. Darren Waller, good to have you.
Yes, sir, it's good to be here.
Dana White, welcome to the Alumni Lounge.
Thanks for having me, brother.
Big member of our NFL alumni family, the CEO of the XFL, Mr. Oliver Luck.
Charlie, good to see you. Thanks for having me.
We're here with the president, Mr. Eric Price. Good to see you.
Search NFL Alumni Lounge on TuneIn to listen.
Ready to talk brass tacks on what's happening in Major League Baseball?
Turn to the Effectively Wild podcast from Fangraphs for daily statistics, analysis, and commentary.
One team will say, yeah, we're going to keep paying minor leaguers their stipend, and another team will say, we're going to extend the stipend through this month, and then another team will say, nope, we're cutting them off. So are extending it at least through August, which would basically be the end of the minor league regular season.
Search Effectively Wild on TuneIn to listen.
We're all guilty of spending too much time on social media. Why not add something genuinely useful to your feed with TuneIn? Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn about some of the best stuff happening around the app. You might just discover your next audio obsession.
Hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio. This is Bloomberg Markets with Bonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney.
The Fed action, essentially unlimited quantitative easing.
Companies taking aim at coronavirus vaccines and other treatments.
This could be a lower for longer hit.
Market sell-off glowing global once again.
Breaking market news and insight from Bloomberg experts.
It's possible that this is going to be a scarring recession.
The Fed is really showing that they're doing whatever it takes.
A lot of people don't expect that the economy will reopen in full.
This is really hitting industrial America, and it's a major crisis.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Bonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
We have a fabulous hour coming up. We're going to continue to speak about, the Supreme Court decisions and the impact that will have on the election coming up. And we also have to talk about some other stories today.
Okay, I'm placing an order to buy euro at 112.94. So order placed to buy euro at 112.94. Okay, position open.
Pumping more, and Treasury yields are dipping. Let's take a look at those numbers, as we have a tendency to do every 15 minutes. The S&P takes a leg down. It's down 1.3%, down 40. The Dow is down 1.6%, down 427. And the NASDAQ has now reversed course. It's out of the green and down 0.7%, down 72. The 10-year is up 13.30 seconds. The yield is 0.62%. West Texas Intermediate crude's down 3.3% at 39.53 a barrel. COMEX gold's down 0.4% at 18.14 even per ounce. The dollar yen 107.27. The euro $1.1295, and the British pound $1.26. Let me look at that closer. $1.26.15. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. Bloomberg Markets continues with Bonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney.
Greg Jarrett, thank you so much. We appreciate that. Markets turning lower, as Greg mentioned, with the S&P and down about 1.4%, the Dow down 1.8%. Let's get a sense of what's going on in the world of small and mid-cap stocks. We can do that with Bloomberg Stocks editor Dave Wilson. Dave, what are you looking at?
Steeper declines are going on, Paul. You've got the Russell 2000 index down almost 2.8%, twice as much as the S&P 500. So not a good day for smaller companies for sure. The Russell's steepest drop belongs to Bed Bath & Beyond, whose ticker is BBBY. The home furnishings retailer has declined 22.5%. Bed Bath & Beyond plans to close about 20% of its stores in the next 2 years. Agro Fresh Solutions, ticker AGFS, has lost 15%. The produce freshness company was sued to block a shareholder vote on selling $150 million of convertible preferred stock to a private equity firm. And AZZ, whose ticker is also AZZ, has fallen 10%. Fiscal first quarter earnings at the Power Equipment and Steel Galvanizing Company trailed analysts' average estimate in the Bloomberg survey. Now, the Russell's sharpest gain belongs to Veritone, ticker VERI. The artificial intelligence company has climbed more than 18%. Preliminary second quarter results showed a narrower loss and higher revenue than the company forecast. And Prothena, ticker PRTA, is added at 11.5%. The drug developer was raised to the equivalent of buy from hold at Oppenheimer.
Dave, not going to let you go just yet today. We usually do, but we've had a bit of a pretty massive sell-off in the last few minutes. We're down 1.9% now on the Dow and 1.5% on the S&P. What happened?
Well, you consider what the Supreme Court had to say about President Trump's tax returns, and that's going to be an issue in the November elections, and the decision didn't go over so well, it would seem, with investors. And you've just seen the declines that really started from the first few minutes of trading be magnified after those court decisions came in.
Really fascinating, endlessly fascinating, this market, I have to say. Dave Wilson, thank you. He will be back. N.I. Wilson on your Bloomberg Chart of the Day and contributor each hour here on Bloomberg Markets. Let's get now to Sally Bakewell, because she knows a thing or two about strange market moves, and we're delighted to have her on the programme this morning. Sally, you have a great story out today, and just perhaps if you could summarise for us the main points. It's quite a complicated story, but just give us the rundown.
Hi, Bonnie. Thank you. Yes, it sure is complicated, and strange market moves are exactly right. I think in this case, what we've got is something that it epitomizes what's happening in credit markets right now, where we had for a good number of years this erosion in credit agreement terms. So borrowers could get their debt on these super easy terms, which are now coming back to bite all these creditors in the proverbial, because now companies are facing distress, like Certa Simmons, the mattress company this story is about, and what they're doing is they're pulling on those weaker credit provisions in their documents to manage their debt burdens, which have become almost unsustainable amid the COVID pandemic. Creditors are not loving this, and in this case, what Certa Simmons did, Apollo and a couple of its allies are trying to sue to block. They were not successful, which means that the deal could become a bit of a template for other borrowers.
All right, so Sally, what we've seen, as you were just mentioning, was terms that were very beneficial for the borrower, whether it's covenant-light deals or whatever, just terms in general. That was kind of a function of, I guess, just a very vibrant, strong credit market, risk-on market here. You get a sense that the tide is changing?
The tide, I think the tide is changing, absolutely. And now what we're seeing, it's now being categorized by companies doing whatever they can to try and get lenders to agree to these debt restructurings. And lenders have, as you say, they were amenable when times were good. And so they bought this debt with the weaker provisions, maybe not fully anticipating that those provisions would one day be used to their maximum capacity, which some say is not really a fair argument, because you're a sophisticated investor. You should know exactly what you're doing. You can't really complain after the fact that you didn't know. But nonetheless, these are the debates swirling in the market at the moment. And the results of these credit market brawls, this Certa Simmons one, we've had them for companies like Travelport, the bookings operator, AMC, the movie theater chain. The results of those are going to be watched so closely, because other companies in similar, more distressed situations are going to see if they can do the same thing.
So we're talking about contract law for the most part, as you mentioned, Paul, and as you've been speaking about. But from now on, will there be anything resembling sort of similar restructurings? So there was a time when you could actually sort of just go in and get your run-of-the-mill restructuring package and have that sort of up and running, and the creditors would agree. It does seem like this is different, though, and that every kind of restructuring and every agreement that's revised with creditors is a one-off.
Yeah, I think what's happening is they've always been, some of these, especially debt exchanges, which is what was in the Certa Simmons deal, they've always been a little bit aggressive. They always have slightly onerous terms. But what we're seeing is maybe just these things going into hyperdrive. They're taking it to another level with how they try and push them forward. So that's something that we can probably expect to see more of, because the more we see, the more people will think they can also do. So the terms have always been there, but they're just getting a little bit more rambunctious in the way that they're trying to get these deals through.
Sally Bakewell, thanks so much for joining us. We appreciate your thoughts here on kind of what we're seeing in the leverage loan market, the credit markets, as more and more companies face financial distress. People taking a look at those credit terms a little bit more closely. Sally Bakewell, corporate finance reporter for Bloomberg News. Again, kind of talking about that Apollo finance deal with CERTA certainly going to the courts, and really a question of where the rights reside. Looking at the markets here, Vonnie, as you pointed out just briefly, really taking a turn down just in the last half hour or so. We have the S&P down 1.25%. The Dow off 434 points. That's 1.6%, sitting at 25,635. So a real move down in the markets. NASDAQ doing a little bit better, down about 0.7%. Just want to give you that update as the markets turn. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. for World and National Headlines with Nathan Hager. Nathan.
Well, Paul, President Trump is not going to be able to keep his long-held financial records a secret for much longer. In a split decision on the final day of its term, the Supreme Court has ruled a New York grand jury can enforce subpoenas to access those records, while a House Democratic request for them will have to wait. Bloomberg's Irv Chapman has reaction from Washington.
Moments after the decision in the New York case, House Republican leader Kevin McCarthy offered his reaction at his weekly news conference.
The Supreme Court made a decision. I've watched President Trump abide by all the requests that someone has for financial disclosure. It seems to me the New York District Attorney and others that have tried for it seems much more political than anything else. I think this decision has already been made by the president releasing all of his financial disclosures when he ran for president the first time.
The Supreme Court went on to block access to the Trump financial records by committees of Congress until lower courts rule on their relevance. In Washington, Irv Chapman, Bloomberg Radio.
And President Trump reacted to the decision on Twitter, calling it a political prosecution. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi is speaking to reporters right now. She says the high court has ruled President Trump is not above the law. Coronavirus deaths and hospitalizations have hit new records in one of the worst COVID-19 hotspots in this country, Florida. The state reported another 120 deaths today. That was well more than double yesterday's count. Daily hospitalizations rose another 2.4% to a record of 409. Overall infections in Florida jumped 4%. That was below the previous 7-day average. Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg Quick Take, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. I'm Nathan Hager. This is Bloomberg.
You may not be getting on planes yet.
At what point do we start to see this elusive V-shaped recovery?
But for detailed, up-to-the-minute news of Asia, you don't have to.
Do you think that the tension has the possibility to destabilize Asian assets?
Bloomberg Daybreak Asia.
Do you expect some of these companies that come and list here to then delist in New York?
Tonight at 6 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
Imagine being fired because of who you love. Imagine being denied medical treatment because of who you marry. Imagine being evicted because of who you are. Millions of Americans don't have to imagine this. They have to live it. Because in 31 states, it's legal to discriminate against LGBT people. Get the facts at beyondido.org. Brought to you by the Gill Foundation and the Ad Council.
How long? How much? How many? Financial, policy, and medical experts are working on answers 24/7.
What about public debt?
We are listening to those experts 24/7.
Is the Fed effectively widening this wealth gap with its programs?
Because you want answers too.
What's the most important, the trillions in stimulus, the economy's reopening, or the infections curve bending?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening.
There are everyday actions to help prevent the spread of respiratory diseases. Wash your hands. Avoid close contact with people who are sick. Avoid touching your eyes, nose, and mouth. Stay home when you are sick. Cover your cough or sneeze. Clean and disinfect frequently touched objects with household cleaning spray. For more information, visit cdc.gov/COVID-19. This message brought to you by the National Association of Broadcasters and this station.
Economics.
All this doom and gloom was out there.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Here's to you that learned with homeschooling that your kids are smarter than you. Here's to all the self-taught banana bread bakers. And to you that rock that very questionable homemade haircut. Costa is giving £3 to everyone that missed us as much as we missed you. Get your £3 in the Costa app today and enjoy a coffee, cake or snack on us. Go on, you earned it. Terms and conditions apply. For details visit costa.co.uk/terms.
In line with government guidelines, face coverings are now compulsory on public transport. At Asda, you can get a 4-pack of Prima disposable face coverings for £2.80, or a 2-pack of washable face coverings.
Okay, I'm placing a stop on profit. I still cannot place. Move too fast. Down. Let's see if I will be able to place stop on profit. Okay, yep, I'm placing a stop on profit at 112.96. Okay, 112.96, stop on profit.
Shipping kettles.
Instruments to kids.
Art for walls.
Treats to pets. Shorts for sunny weekends.
To brighten up one British home at a time.
Thousands of small businesses on eBay are helping to keep the nation going. They are individually brilliant, stronger as one. Buy, sell, eBay.
Give yourself a Diet Coke break.
When you're facing a problem, like how to make an electric car more efficient, you could sit down and talk it through. But at Honda, we decided to listen to the wind tunnel. With wing mirrors? Or without? With? Without? With? Without? Or with cameras instead of wing mirrors? The new Honda E with wing cameras, not...
Position closed on euro. £200 profit. Position closed at 112.96.
And take a bow, because this deal's going to raise a brow. Get 9 pieces of original recipe chicken for an eye-popping $5.99. What the... Every Tuesday at KFC. Participating restaurants ends 18th of August 2020. Tuesdays only, subject to availability, not available online.
Should your kids go back to school? Ask Andrea. She's a teacher.
We're doing everything we can to keep the children safe and happy at school, which is why it's great that more of those who can are coming back. Not only for their education, but for their overall well-being too. It gives them a routine, helps develop their social skills, and they get to see their friends too.
If your child is eligible, they should return to school. The government is working towards getting all pupils back in September. Stay alert. Control the virus. Save lives.
24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Stocks fall as financial companies are among the worst performers on the S&P. Wells Fargo prepared to cut thousands of jobs, and the Dow Jones Industrial Average fell more than 1.5%. Oil tumbles as Libya pumps the black gold, or more of it. We check the markets every 15 minutes. The S&P is down 1.4%, down 45. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 1.8%, down 475. And the NASDAQ is down 0.8%, down 80. The 10-year is up 13.30 seconds with a yield of 0.62%. West Texas Intermediate's down 3.3% at 39.57 a barrel. COMEX Gold's down 1% at 18.03 even. The dollar yen 107.26. The euro is $1.12.92. and the British pound $1.2605. A couple of the heavy hitters. Apple is down 0.3%. Cisco is up 1.1%, and Netflix is down 1.2%. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
All right, Greg, thank you.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Vonnie Quinn on Bloomberg Radio.
March 16th low, up almost 90%, still down year to date, but up 90% from that March low. Just extraordinary continued volatility, but crypto is here to stay. To get some latest, we welcome Rich Rosenblum. He's co-founder and co-head of trading at GSR based in New York City. Rich, thanks so much for joining us here. Give us a sense of kind of maybe just how crypto and blockchain and Bitcoin and all those things have kind of performed over the last several months of this new world that we find ourselves in.
It's a great question. If you look at Bitcoin itself, over the last 2 months, it's been mired in a rather thin range between the high 8,000s to 10,000. But I think what's more interesting is that you have a whole parallel ecosystem that, even though it was fueled by Bitcoin, it's rather independent. And I say that since the traditional financial market is focused on Bitcoin as proverbial digital gold, but there's this entire ecosystem that serves a variety of other functions. And even though on a broad scale, the market could say, I believe more in Bitcoin, I'm not as focused on altcoins. If you take a smaller snapshot, such as this week, Bitcoin's rallied a few percent from 9,000 to 9,400, adding roughly 10 billion of market value. But if you take two other cryptos that are in the top 15, they've added over 20 billion of market value and rallied in these 3 days alone between 15 and 40%. So I think there's a lot of action in the space that doesn't get quite enough focus as it should, because I think that the broad market is just focused on the big bellwether, which is Bitcoin. But in terms of the activity in the space, for groups that are more looking for the activity with the crypto natives, GSR, we trade with exchanges. We still take business with the miners, with the issuers. We're doing more business in the altcoin space than in Bitcoin. And I think that's really the story of this week, since we're seeing a bit of a mini altcoin boom. So if you're looking at Bitcoin prices and seeing them up or down 1% per day, you're missing that there's some other assets that are up 35% in a single day. And I think that some of these groups, it might be that it appears more speculation, and it's based on Chinese economy operating back at full cylinders, and there's some trading elements that there's a momentum trade. People want to buy the groups that are meeting new highs. But I think from speaking to these projects directly, there's a lot of building onto these ecosystems, and we're going to see the benefits of these products being built as we move out of that prototype phase and to more of a stage where you see the emerging crypto economy as one where it's more of its own tech ecosphere of its own.
Yeah, whatever happened to all of the companies that were trying to build out the blockchain and the ecosphere, and then sort of ran into a little bit of difficulty right when everyone thought that they were taking over the world?
Yeah, I think that there's always cycles of hype and bust for any new products, especially if it's tech-focused. And might have gotten too much attention to certain projects. But if you look at early-stage investing, angel investing, most of the projects are not going to succeed in the end. And as long as there's going to be still a handful of very successful projects, then they can remain leaders in the space and be a good place to invest for the future. So I think that the hype in 2017, was early for Bitcoin itself. And at that point, I think you need more infrastructure to be in place. And we're in a world's different place as far as custody, clearing, execution. But I think there are some other parts of the ecosystem that they just need some more time to play out. And if you look at the 3,000 different ICOs, I'm sure that the bulk of them aren't going to succeed, just like any 3,000 groups of tech companies that are brand new. But if there's 100 that end up powerhouses and changing, the global ecosystem, then, I think it's still going to be a good sign for things to come and the decades that we are to see. Since, looking at it on the baseball framework, we're certainly very much in the second, if not the first inning.
So, Rich, kind of where are we in terms of adoption of crypto as an investment asset class by institutional investors? I know you trade with a lot of folks out there. Kind of where do you think we are there?
So in terms of the saturation, all the data would point to decently high saturation, as much as 30%. But I think that might be reaching that an institution tangentially has some type of access to some investment related to crypto. But I think there's some demographic issues in which, age-wise, people that are part of the older generation, they still feel that even if Bitcoin goes up, they don't know if that's a real gain. It seems like it's some type of, internet currency that can't be translated into real dollars, versus millennials or younger generations, below 30 years old. They tend to believe more in crypto than they do in the normal stock market. And so I think that, give it 5-10 years, these demographics are certainly going to be, in favor of crypto investing. But as far as today, while Bitcoin, is a powerhouse and gets a lot of attention from both the media and investors, it still wouldn't be one of the top 20 stocks in the S&P. So I think that if that saturation in terms of people buying and putting in their portfolio is more at 15%, I think that's pretty good, and there's room to build.
Rich, thank you. Fascinating discussion. Rich Rosenblum is co-founder and co-head of trading at GSR, which trades in digital assets and provides derivatives and volatility hedging products as well. I want to just bring you some news now. Harley Davidson saying it's cutting 700 jobs. It employs about 5,600 in total. It's losing its CFO. A restructuring push it's calling the Rewire, down 1.5% now.
This is a Bloomberg Money Minute. Stocks have turned lower with the Dow dropping more than 400 points. Financial companies among the worst performers. Wells Fargo is said to be preparing to cut thousands of jobs later this year. Pressure to dramatically reduce costs is coming to a head inside the bank. Sur La Table filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy. Some of the specialty cookware retailer stores will close. DocuSign's $38 million acquisition of Live Oak Technologies will expand the company's digital signature offerings as more people look to do notarized transactions remotely because of COVID-19. Live Oak's technology will enable notarized transactions over video. And another company is cutting Washington Redskins merchandise from its site. Amazon.com now joins Walmart, Target, and Nike in casting out the team's products due to the name. The e-commerce giant told sellers that they have 48 hours to review and remove Redskins products flagged by Amazon. Courtney Donahoe, Bloomberg Radio.
Hi, we're the Goo Goo Dolls. We're fortunate that our daughters have what they need to grow and learn. But that isn't the case for nearly 13 million kids in the U.S. that struggle with hunger.
Childhood hunger is a heartbreaking reality that Feeding America is working to change. Each year, the Feeding America network of food banks rescues billions of pounds of good food that would have gone to waste and provides it to families and children in need.
You can help kids in need in your community by visiting feedingamerica.org.
Brought to you by Feeding America and the Ad Council.
With COVID-19, so much is unknown.
Is this the worst you've seen?
But we are committed to getting you every piece of information we can as soon as we can.
Tell us about this first big win you have. What is it, 24 million N95 masks?
Fewer unknowns.
Who's winning here? Where is the pressure right now?
That's our goal.
What worries you the most? The time it's going to take for a vaccine?
Bloomberg Radio, the Bloomberg Business app, and BloombergRadio.com. Bloomberg, the world is listening. The best of Bloomberg Business Week every business day.
We've got a market sell-off that's spreading around the globe.
The Bloomberg Business Week podcast with Carol Masser and Jason Kelly.
Let's do the Bloomberg Business Week Bite of the day, Carol.
The day's breaking global business, finance, and tech news, along with smart analysis.
We know the Fed is going to be sure and steady.
The Bloomberg Business Week podcast.
A great scoop on the terminal.
Listen today on BloombergRadio.com, the Bloomberg Business app, or subscribe on Apple Podcasts.
Hope you enjoyed your meal. And I just want to say, he's lucky to have a brother like you.
Lucky? Caring for my brother is far from easy. But he's a part of me,
like my arms and legs, so I'll be his. No time for tired. Nothing can disable this love. He needs me, but I'm the lucky one, even though I need help now and then.
If you're caring for a loved one, visit aarp.org/caregiving for care guides and community. Support for your strength. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
What's the true value of your custodial relationship? Ben Harrison of BNY Mellon's Pershing explains.
As sophisticated investors demand more from their advisors, advisory firms, in turn, need to rely on their custodian to help them grow their complex businesses. At BNY Mellon's Pershing, supporting the rapid growth of RIAs is our number one priority. We understand what it means to deliver true value to our clients who are looking for a custodian that is aligned with their best interest and delivers high-value solutions, all in an open architecture environment with flexibility, choice, and transparency. Learn why so many of the largest advisory firms turn to us for the financial strength, resiliency, and high-touch service that BNY Mellon Pershing provides. When you work with Pershing, we put your business first. Can your custodian say that?
Learn more at Pershing.com or call 800-445-4467. Pershing Advisor Solutions, LLC. Member FINRA SIPC.
Have you wanted to speak a new language, but you thought it'd be too hard or take too much time? Then go to Babbel.com, download the app, and try it for free. In just 15 minutes a day, you'll be on your way to speaking a new language in just a few weeks. And right now, you can try Babbel for free. Babbel starts out teaching you words and phrases by matching them with pictures. You won't believe how easy the interactive program is. Soon the sentences get a little bigger, and before you know it, you're having simulated conversations voiced by native speakers. And because Babbel is crafted by language experts and uses the spaced repetition method, in just 10 to 15 minutes a day, you'll be speaking the language of your choice with real confidence. With Babbel, you can speak a language. Just go to Babbel.com and start your first lesson in the language of your choice for free. Download the Babbel app or go to Babbel.com and try it for free. That's Babbel.com.
To buy your home, you became a house hunting ace, learned about loans, scoured neighborhoods, and asked the right questions. Now you're queen of your castle. If you manage that, you can get your retirement plan on track. Visiting aceyourretirement.org can help. With 401k tips and smart saving strategies, you'll feel empowered to own your retirement like you own your home. Go to aceyourretirement.org. Because when it comes to clearing financial hurdles, you're an ace. Brought to you by AARP and the Ad Council.
This pandemic is about more than markets.
What did you see and hear from the doctor?
This is about people.
That face-to-face is really important.
Bloomberg Business Week.
There's some intelligence built in.
Weekday afternoons at 2 Eastern on Bloomberg Radio. Broadcasting live from the Bloomberg Interactive Brokers Studio in New York. Bloomberg 1130 to Washington, D.C. Bloomberg 99.1 to Boston. Bloomberg 106.1 to San Francisco. Bloomberg 960 to the country. Sirius XM Channel 119. And around the globe, the Bloomberg Business app and BloombergRadio.com. This is Bloomberg Markets.
Coming up, we're going to take a look at how COVID-19 is bankrupting American companies at a relentless pace. Plus, we're going to chat with Barry Ritholtz, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management. We're going to get his thoughts on the market here as we grind higher. But first, let's go to Greg Jarrett of Bloomberg News for a Bloomberg Business Flash. Greg.
Stocks are downfall on concern that a resurgence in coronavirus cases will derail the comeback for the economy. Oil's down below $40 a barrel on news that Libya is pumping more. And Treasury yields are down. We take a look at those markets every 15 minutes. The S&P is down 1.4%, down 45. The Dow's down 1.8%, down 475. And the NASDAQ is down 0.8%, down 82. The 10-year is currently up 14.30 seconds. The yield is 0.61%. West Texas Intermediate crude's down 3% now at 39.67 a barrel, while COMEX gold is down 0.75% at 1807.40 an ounce. The dollar yen is at 107.23. The euro is $1.12.99, and the British pound $1.26.14. AMC Entertainment Holdings is set to announce a deal with bondholders that would allow private equity firm Silver Lake to jump up the repayment priority line, setting the stage for another credit market brawl as companies dealing with the fallout of COVID-19 seek to restructure their debt. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
You're listening to Bloomberg Markets with Vonnie Quinn and Paul Sweeney on Bloomberg Radio.
right, so COVID-19 bankrupting American companies at a relentless pace, and boy is it, 111 companies right now, and expect to see more on NIBCY today. A great story with fantastic graphics. Let's bring in the author, Davide Chiliuzzo, who joins us now to talk about these retailers, airlines, restaurants, but also sports leagues and even an archdiocese or more. Davide, just first of all, give us a rundown of the sort of variety of companies and entities that are declaring.
Yeah, good morning, Bonnie. It's really a cross-section of corporate America. That's what the interesting part of this exercise is. There are names like Hertz and JCPenney, even Brooks Brothers recently that, nearly everyone is familiar with. But in the research that we did for this story, we also found a lot of smaller companies whose stories have gone largely unnoticed. And as you said, there is a lot of retail and restaurants in there. A lot of energy companies with the fall in oil prices and entertainment sectors that are directly impacted by COVID. But then you find also a lot of companies that had financial issues from before, and for whom COVID was just like, the last drop. The Archdiocese case that you brought about is, it's the New Orleans Archdiocese. It's one of over 20 that, over the past several years have used bankruptcy as a way to settle sexual abuse allegations. So they obviously had issues before, but COVID is just one more challenge that they faced. And in their core papers, they said, a drop in collections and offerings added to an already strained budget.
So, David, it's interesting. I think what we've heard just anecdotally about some of these bankruptcies in certain industries is that the ones that went into this pandemic, the companies that went into this pandemic with a over-leveraged balance sheet, obviously the most at risk here. Are you finding that's still the case, or are we finding companies that are relatively healthy in terms of capitalization, they're also being pushed to the brink?
I think we've found both. There are definitely companies that were struggling with heavy debt loads from before. And in some cases, those were the results of leverage buyouts. But in other cases, and especially with some of the smaller companies, the companies were doing fine. They weren't over-levered, and they just happened to be in sectors that are directly impacted by COVID. So, for example, I interviewed the owner of Bounce for Fun, which is a small company outside of Dallas that rents out water slides and bounce houses. The company was on track for a record year, and business was going exceptionally well. The problem is they had 100% cancellations as soon as shutdown orders came in. And the owner, he said he got a PPP loan that lasted for a couple of months, but he just didn't see a way for the business to continue, not over the next few months, but probably not even the next season.
So the one I found particularly sad is the XFL. I mean, whether or not you're a fan of Vince McMahon and all that he's done, this was a way for football players who maybe weren't fully able to continue at the highest levels or didn't make it to the highest levels to play, right? It was a pro football league. It declared bankruptcy and fired about 500 football players. Alpha Entertainment was the company there. Is there any chance that companies like this will come out of this maybe smaller, more streamlined, but still an entity?
Absolutely. I mean, I guess it depends on the sector and whether there are, willing buyers for the company or its slimmed down version of the company or its assets. But, filing for bankruptcy doesn't necessarily mean you're going out of business for good. So some of these companies may reemerge in a different form. They may be bought by a competitor or an organization that is active in that space. We have come across a few cases where the company is actually liquidating. So they're selling off all of their assets and shutting down for good. But I would say that's not the majority of cases that we've come across so far.
So, David, how bad is this going to get, or how bad could this get? Do you expect to see, an acceleration of these bankruptcies over the next several months?
It remains to be seen. If you look at the timeline, we definitely see a few cases in May. Then we had a big increase during April, May. and June, and we've started seeing quite a few cases in July as well. I think much will depend on how much access to financing these companies have, both in terms of capital markets if they're large enough, or loan from banks or government programs if they're smaller. Obviously, some of the stimulus that was put in place is running out, like in the case of PPP. So you can rule out the possibility that as the effect of that stimulus kind of fades away, you may see more cases for sure.
Davide, thanks so much for joining us. Davide Sigli-Uzo, certainly the name of the day, corporate finance reporter for Bloomberg News, bringing us a fascinating story about, unfortunately, this relentless path of bankruptcies that we're starting to see as a result of the pandemic, Vonnie. And as Davide was suggesting, probably more to come going forward.
Yeah, I mean, I hate to admit it, but I was actually surprised that it was only 111 so far. I mean, we've been in this for several months, and my only thinking is that, maybe people did tap the PPP, and perhaps there's an effort on the part of banks to keep companies going, but will we see, a glut more later in the year? And it's just tough. I mean, there's another one, American Addiction Centers. They weren't getting customers during the pandemic, and if they're not getting customers, it's not because people have given up drugs on their own, right? So that was another very sad one, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So we'll have to pay attention to that. But unfortunately, the data is likely to be continue to be very challenging as it relates to businesses going out of business as a result of this pandemic. Right now, let's head down to Washington, D.C. for world and national headlines. We can do that with Nathan Hager. Nathan.
All President Trump is reacting angrily to a Supreme Court decision that could force him to hand over his long-secret financial records to a New York grand jury. The president unleashed a tweet stream calling it a political prosecution after the justices ruled in a 7-2 decision that the president cannot block prosecutors from accessing his documents. House Majority Leader Kevin McCarthy agrees.
It seems to me the New York district attorney and others that have tried for it seems much more political than anything else.
But for House Speaker Democrat Nancy Pelosi,
the Supreme Court, including the president's appointees, have declared that he is not above the law.
As for House Democrats' subpoenas for those records, the Supreme Court sent those back to lower courts, meaning Congress likely will not see them before the November election. This afternoon, Joe Biden heads to his hometown of Scranton, Pennsylvania, to lay out his plans for reviving the economy during the pandemic. Bloomberg's Kevin Cirilli reports he'll take a centrist approach.
It focuses on workforce development. It focuses on infrastructure to some extent, and, of course, racial inequality.
The Biden campaign says the plan focuses on 4 areas. The first, the former vice president will discuss today, is a $700 billion proposal to buy American and create manufacturing jobs. Just in South Korea's Yonhap news agency is reporting a body has been found. It is believed to be that of Seoul Mayor Park Won-soon. Park's daughter reported him missing today after he left her a voicemail that she said sounded like a will. Global news, 24 hours a day on air and on Bloomberg. Quick Take powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in more than 120 countries. This is Bloomberg.
Hey, y'all, Jeff Foxworthy here. Now, if you've ever found yourself repeating the same thing over and over for 75 years, you might be Smokey Bear.
Only you can prevent wildfires.
That's why I'm filling in for Smokey to switch things up, because there's a lot more to say. And I should know because my grandfather was a firefighter. And one of the things he taught me is that the people that love the outdoors the most are often the ones accidentally starting wildfires, which means always BYOB. No, bring your own bucket to the campfire. And be extra careful with things like burning yard trimmings. Don't just walk away, or chances are you might be starting a wildfire. So for the love of the outdoors, go to SmokeyBear.com to learn more about wildfire prevention. Brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service, your state forester, and the Ad Council.
25 years ago, NJIT graduate Dick Sweeney co-founded Keurig Green Mountain, a company whose incredible innovations changed the way the world brews a cup of coffee. Today, he lectures widely on business leadership and is a strong advocate for NJIT's work to combine business education with the power of STEM.
NJIT is definitely fostering the innovative thinking for budding entrepreneurs simply because that's the world we live in. NJIT is producing students that have been trained, educated, and given the business acumen to be a contributor to a company. The distinct mission is to develop great STEM scholars. The attributes I've always looked for in team members are heart, smarts, guts, and luck. So we want people with passion, intelligence, courage, and never discount luck. The student coming out of NJIT has experienced all of that.
NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. Learn more at njit.edu.
Are you interested in a challenging and exciting career?
The big Volkswagen event is now on. If you're after a new Volkswagen, we offer to pay your first 3 months finance payments and an additional £500 to £1,000 contribution to your deposit at 3.8% APR representative. Hello, sir. Do any take your fancy?
Well, yes, a new Golf or T-Cross. A Tiguan. No, Passat. Oh, I need to sit down.
Here, have a seat.
The big Volkswagen event. With every type of car on offer, you may have trouble choosing. With Solutions Personal Contract Plan until 12th of July excludes e-Golf at participating retailers only. Minimum 46 months to receive 3 months finance payments. Indemnities may be required. Volkswagen Finance. Contact your local retailer to book an appointment.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
At Halfords, we're here to get you where you want to be. Why not get road ready with a free car check worth £15 at all our stores and garages? With 25,000 weekly slots available at 700 locations, you can count on us to get you safely back on the road. Or even back beside the seaside. From MOTs to tyre fittings, there's no job too big or too small. Halfords, for life's journeys.
For up to 50% off a choice of carpets and beds. For 20% off a huge range of floors with selected underlay. Carpet Right. For life.
Minions, did you know Sky Broadband Superfast guarantees your speed? No, Stuart, it doesn't guarantee you'll win the game. Or that your video will go viral. Or that you'll match with the love of your life. But Sky Broadband Superfast does guarantee the speed we promised or money back. So reliable, it's minion-proof. Sky, believe in better. Sky Fibre areas only. Speed measured to hub must drop below min download speed for 3 consecutive days. 1 month subscription refund. Claim up to twice in min-term after first fortnight. See sky.com.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
To help keep you and your loved ones safe, TuneIn has the latest guidelines from the CDC. Outdoor gatherings, wash your hands and don't touch your face. Stay at least 6 feet from people you don't live with. Wear a mask. Don't share food, toys, or other items, and avoid shared surfaces. Participate in events like these infrequently. For the latest stories and updates on COVID-19, search Coronavirus News on TuneIn.
How do you keep track of all your favorite stations and podcasts? Easy. You add them to your favorites list. Just find the audio you want to bookmark and tap the heart icon. Then, whenever you want to browse your favorites, you'll find everything under the Favorites tab.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
Hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Sponsored by Witham, a forward-thinking advisory and accounting firm helping clients to be in a position of strength in the new reality of business. Learn about their innovative solutions by visiting Witham.com. Financial companies are among the worst performers in a declining S&P, pushing the gauge to a one-week low as Wells Fargo and Company prepares to cut thousands of jobs across the world. Dow Jones Industrial Average loss exceeded 1.5%. European shares joined the slump after erasing an advance. We check the markets every 15 minutes throughout the trading day on Bloomberg Radio. The S&P is now down 1.4%, down 44. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is down 1.8%, down 461. And the NASDAQ is down 0.7%, down 72. The 10-year is up 14.30 with a yield of 0.61%. West Texas Intermediate crude started to slide after Libya announced it was going to pump some more oil, down 2.8% at 39.76 a barrel. COMEX gold's down 0.75% at 18.07 even per ounce. The dollar yen 107.29, the euro $1.12.94, and the British pound $1.26.16. Applications for unemployment benefits in the U.S. declined last week by more than projected, easing concerns of a renewed downturn in the labor market after several large states reported a pickup in coronavirus cases. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett.
This is Bloomberg Markets with Paul Sweeney and Bonnie Quinn on Bloomberg Radio.
Well, as Greg Jarrett was just reporting more sobering jobless claims numbers today. I guess a glass half full is that reading would be that the claims are lower than expected. But the glass half empty is that they're still way, way, way too high, and a big concern to the overall economic outlook. To get a sense of kind of how we should be putting those kinds of numbers into context of our investment outlook, we welcome Barry Ritholtz, founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management. He's a Bloomberg opinion columnist and host of a fantastic podcast, Masters of Business. Barry, thanks so much for joining us once again here. How are you thinking about, I guess, the issue here? We got the jobless numbers today. Again, another difficult number. We're getting some difficult data coming out of some key states like California, Texas, Florida, as it relates to the virus. How is that coloring maybe kind of how you're looking at the markets these days?
You know, I'm looking at the economic data sort of like the steroid era in baseball, where all those records are set with an asterisk. We still don't have an exact measure of unemployment and first-time claims. It took the various states a long time to catch up. They were just overwhelmed by 100x what their normal daily claims are like. And so I'm aware that this is a lagging indicator, and in these circumstances, it's an especially lagging indicator because they're still processing things from April and May into July. That said, it doesn't appear that the markets are really paying a whole lot of attention to the state of the economy. In general, it looks like investors are thinking about 2021 and 2022 and are willing to look over the valley of 2020 with its economic contraction and huge drop in profits.
So, Barry, the steroid analogy in baseball is actually wonderful because in both cases, a lot of physical harm is being done and there's a huge amount of denial. Would you say that the markets are actually in denial here, or do they just not care?
Neither. Markets are, remember, it's a probabilistic bet about, with real money on the line, about what is a likely future discounted cash flow and what is the most probable outcome from a range of possibilities. The other thing to keep in mind, and this is really important because I think people are missing this, and it's my column on this coming Monday, is we have a home country bias. We tend to look around the United States and say, gee, everything's a mess. We mishandled the pandemic. We bungled the reopening. The economy is still doing poorly. Why are stocks going higher? Well, when we look at what's driving stocks, it's really the 10 biggest technology companies. The 6 biggest companies over the past 5 years have accounted for just about 75% of the gains in market cap. And there's a reason for that. They're global companies where the average S&P 500 gets a little over 40% of their revenues from international markets. The big tech companies are over half, and some of them, like Apple, are as much as 60%. And when we look around the rest of the world, they handled their pandemic better, they handled their reopening better, and their economy is doing better. So not a big surprise that companies like Apple and Google and Netflix and Microsoft are doing well overseas, and even Amazon, one of the biggest companies in the United States, is well positioned to take care of and profit from our lockdown and our, however long this period lasts. Amazon has been a giant winner from these circumstances.
Hey, Barry, let's switch gears a little bit and talk about something called the presidential election that's coming up in November, and it's getting very, very little play here as people focus on the pandemic, rightfully so. But we had, some of those Supreme Court decisions come out this morning, and it looked like the market kind of traded off on the news. And, it's interesting to think, how do you think the market is thinking about a potential Biden presidency?
So I think people put way too much emphasis on the market as a forward. It's almost a Rorschach test. People read into it what they want. When you look at the rise of Biden in the polls and you look at the president's fall in the polls, it took place at a time when the market was gaining 42% from the lows in March. That's a good 5-year run, 42%. So I don't think over 3 months. I'm not persuaded that the market is really weighing in on what the outcome of the presidential election is going to be. And by the way, Cass Sunstein, who writes for Bloomberg Opinion, and a number of other legal experts at Harvard and Yale have all weighed in long before the Supreme Court ruled 7-2 against the president that he's not a king, he's not above the law, he has to deal with the same disclosures and the same legal process as everybody else. This was not a big shock. I don't really buy into the market is selling off on the disclosure of Trump's taxes, because if you spoke to anybody, there were very few people who were coming out and saying, oh, this is a slam dunk win for the president. It was mostly he should lose, and we wouldn't be surprised if it was 8-1, because you can never get Clarence Thomas to vote against party lines. But 7-2 is not a shock to anybody who's been following this case.
No. Barry, very briefly, do you see a tech sell-off anytime soon, or at least a big 5 sell-off?
Technology has been the only game in town for 5 years, and the old joke about unsustainable market rallies is things that are unsustainable will eventually come to an end. It has been a fool's errand trying to guess when this tech rally is going to end for a solid decade. So I don't want to put my head on the chopping block. It'll go until it's tired of going and no further.
All right, I like that. Just like Barry Ritholtz. Barry, thanks for joining. He is founder of Ritholtz Wealth Management, also Bloomberg Opinion columnist, and his most recent column is about exactly that. Is the stock market overvalued, cheap, or just right? Barry Ritholtz, once again, thanks for joining. Lots more coming up on Bloomberg Radio, but it's been quite the day so far.
Wow.
Paul
Yes.
Sweeney.
Supreme Court, very busy. Interesting to see how President Trump will will have to deal now with some more disclosure of his financial results than probably he will care to provide. Exactly.
Stay tuned. Balance of Power next. We'll dive more into those Supreme Court decisions. This is Bloomberg.
In addition to Bloomberg Radio, you can catch the latest news and biggest newsmakers on Bloomberg Television. Look for us on DirecTV Channel 353 or check your local listings. You need more than a soundbite. You need someone who...
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
You love TuneIn for live breaking news from CNN, MSNBC, Fox, CNBC, and more. But when you can't catch your favorite show as it airs, it might just be a click away as a podcast. Search your favorite news station to explore all the on-demand news shows on TuneIn.
We're all guilty of spending too much time on social media. Why not add something genuinely useful to your feed with TuneIn? Follow @TuneIn on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram to learn about some of the best stuff happening around the app. You might just discover your next audio obsession.
In case you didn't know, TuneIn lets you listen to the same radio stations you pick up on your home or car radio, except you can hear them from anywhere. If you want to find a station from somewhere else in the world, navigate to the By Location section under Browse. Keep exploring with TuneIn.
To help keep you and your loved ones safe, TuneIn has the latest guidelines from the CDC. Outdoor gatherings, wash your hands and don't touch your face. Stay at least 6 feet from people you don't live with. Wear a mask. Don't share food, toys, or other items, and avoid shared surfaces. Participate in events like these infrequently. For the latest stories and updates on COVID-19, search Coronavirus News on TuneIn. Buckle up, race fans.
NASCAR is back in the driver's seat.
And you can cut straight to the action here.
With the Performance Racing Network on TuneIn, you can hear PRN's live coverage of some of this year's top events.
As NASCAR's top drivers, Kevin Harvick,
Clint Boyer, and more get back on the track.
Search Performance Racing Network to listen and see upcoming races.
The world, 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, on the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is Bloomberg Radio.
From New York to our TV and radio audiences worldwide, welcome to Balance of Power, where the world of politics meets the world of business. I'm David Weston. We're going to start out once again with the markets again today. We're going to turn to Kaylee Lyons. And Kaylee, it looked like early on we were going to do pretty well in the markets, and then they've turned around. Is it because of some of the numbers we got on the coronavirus?
That certainly is part of it, David. You're looking at a market that perhaps is more sensitive to the rising virus cases and the threat that it could pose to the recovery. But I would note when things really turned is when we saw the tech heavyweights like Apple and Microsoft flip into negative territory as well. They are back to really roughly flat right now, which is why we're off the lows of the session. But you're still looking at the S&P 500 and the Dow down by 1.25%, 1.5% each. The relative outperformance, though, is still coming from tech. The NASDAQ is only down about 0.5, and the NYSE FANG Plus Index, which houses the biggest of the big tech stocks, is actually up by about 0.1%. And this really just speaks to a broader theme, David, in that it is the tech stocks that carry the market in one direction or another. I crunched the numbers earlier this morning, and as of yesterday's close, the S&P 500 had rallied 865 points off its lows on March 23rd. 251 of those points have come from just 5 names: Apple, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, and Alphabet. That equates to 29% of the gains we've seen in the equity markets. So really underscores the fact that to a large degree, this market is held hostage by the performance of these mega cap companies. They carry us along on the upside, but they also pose a risk to us on the downside as well, David.
Yeah, and as you say, even today, tech is not down as much as some of the other people are down. Is it a risk-off day? What's going on with bonds? What's going on with gold?
So interesting you mentioned gold and bonds. So we are seeing the classic risk-off trade in the fact that the dollar is stronger, of course, seen as more of a safe haven asset, proxy for whether or not it's a risk-on, risk-off day. And you are seeing a bid into treasuries as well. The 10-year yield is down about 4 basis points. But gold is actually slightly weaker today, coming off the highest levels since back in 2011, possibly just a little bit of profit taking there. The more interesting commodity I have my eye on today is copper. Dr. Copper, usually very sensitive to the economic growth story. You'd expect copper to be under pressure on a risk-off day, but it is actually higher today as well. So that's a bit of a mystery, David.
That is a mystery. Okay, thank you so much to Kayla Lyons for that report on the markets. Well, today is also the last day of this term of the Supreme Court of the United States, and it saves some of the biggest decisions to last, 2 of them involving President Trump, about whether people can get access to his private financial records. One, the House of Representatives wanted him. The other, a New York prosecutor. Greg Storr, our Supreme Court reporter, is here to give us sort of what is more or less a split decision, Greg. So start first with this New York prosecutorial. It's a grand jury subpoena for his tax records that are in possession, as I understand it, of his accountant. What did the court say?
Yeah, that one was a pretty clear rejection of the president. Trump was arguing for absolute immunity for president while in office from criminal investigation. So these subpoenas in the grand jury case went to his accounting firm, Mazars, and the president was arguing, while I'm in office, that is too distracting for me to have to deal with my records being subpoenaed. The Supreme Court rejected that. They also rejected the notion that the grand jury would have to meet some special heightened standard to get the president's records. They did allow the case to go forward in the lower court. The president may have other arguments to make, but it was a complete rejection of the president's positions at the Supreme Court.
Well, it did strike me. The president came out with a series of tweets basically taking this on, claiming it was prosecutorial misconduct, that essentially his enemies had sent this back up to what he called a corrupt New York to deal with this. But he didn't make those arguments below, right? He just said, you can't come after them no matter what it is. He didn't say there was any impropriety in seeking the information from his accountants.
That's right. Yeah, it was really a position. In this case, his position was very sweeping, saying that as long as a president is in office, criminal process, meaning a subpoena that even goes to a third party that involves the president's personal information, that's out of bounds. That was the argument he was making, and that's what the Supreme Court rejected today.
Yeah, and just to be perfectly clear, as I understand it, this is a grand jury subpoena, and so if this goes forward, and in fact there aren't other arguments for the president's accountants not to turn over the records, then it goes to the grand jury. That doesn't mean we all get to see them. They're not going to be on the front page of the New York Times tomorrow, right? Grand juries tend to be quite secretive.
That's right. It's the House case that was the one where we might have been able to see them if it had come out the other way. Yes, unless we're talking about, eventually there may be, of course, an indictment out of the grand jury investigation. That's what happens, and maybe information will come out through that indictment. But just because it goes to the grand jury, unless there's a leak, which would be illegal, no, we are not going to see that information.
And it seemed to be quite important to the court that these records don't go to confidential communications from him as president. These are not things he said or did in the Oval Office. These are independent. These were his personal records having to do with taxes.
Yeah, and the reason that's important is because when the president is trying to argue, look, all this would be distracting to me, and distracting in terms of my duties as president. Well, in this case, we're talking about conduct. The Cyrus Vance, the district attorney in Manhattan, is looking into things stemming from those hush money payments to Stormy Daniels and Karen McDougal. That has nothing to do with Trump's work as president, and so it was a harder claim for him to make that this kind of information shouldn't go to a state grand jury.
So, Greg, go over to the other decision that came down involving President Trump and his records, and that was the House. They were subpoenaing to get certain records that they wanted as part of their investigation, their legislative activities. The court was not quite as receptive to what the House was doing.
Yeah, so in that case, there were 3 House committees that sent out 4 subpoenas, and they said that we have legislative things we're looking at. We're looking at presidential conflicts of interest. We're thinking about updating the money laundering laws. We're thinking about, we're exploring foreign interference in the election. And so we want these Trump financial records because they'll help us with those legislative purposes. And both sides took a pretty broad, made pretty broad arguments in this case, and the court essentially said, "Hey, both sides have gone too far here. If we restricted Congress to the extent Trump wants, that would really hamstring Congress in its ability to do its constitutional duties. And if we did what Congress was asking us to do, there would be no limits on what they could seek in terms of presidential records." So essentially, the Supreme Court kicked the cases back to 2 federal appeals courts and said, look at them more closely and be more mindful of the potential imposition on the president.
So finally, Greg, as I say, this marks the end of this term of the court. I think it's fair to say an historic term, not only because it had the first virtual oral arguments in history, but it really took on some big cases. Give us a sense of how important this term of court specifically was.
Yeah, very, very important. I think when we look back on this term, it will in part be the term where it really became John Roberts' court. He was in the majority in every case except for one, and that included several big cases where he sided with the court's liberals involving LGBT job discrimination, involving President Trump's effort to rescind the DACA deferred deportation program, and these restrictions on abortion in Louisiana. He did side with the conservatives, and he is a Republican appointee, in an awful lot of other cases that are maybe a notch below. And then he wrote both the decisions issued today, trying to balance the needs of the president on one hand and Congress and state grand juries on the other.
Okay, thank you so much, Greg. Always great to have you on when it's the Supreme Court we're talking about. That's Greg Storr, our Supreme Court reporter in Washington. In the meantime, yesterday, President Lopez Obrador came from Mexico and got a very warm reception at the White House. We talked with the former U.S. ambassador to Mexico. He is Tony Garza. That's next on Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and on radio.
Will it take for the economy to recover?
What have you missed the most? A haircut? A visit to the shops?
Oh, you look lovely in that.
What about a nice lunch?
Fish and chips, please.
Salt and vinegar with that. Or an afternoon in a pub garden? Fancy a casual bike ride? Or perhaps something a little more intense? Or maybe you want a relaxing day out. Whatever you've missed, get out there and enjoy it again safely. Find out how at gov.uk/enjoy summer safely.
Decisions. Clearing. Isn't it great? So much choice. But hey, listening to me on your desktop isn't getting anything done. You need to take this Thursday afternoon by the scruff of the neck. Ignore this gloomy weather and carve your path to success, which begins just down the road in Southampton at Solent University. After 3 years here, you don't just get a degree. You get a ton of support, real-world experience and connections, and interview fuel. That's why we're in the top 25 for student satisfaction in the Complete University Guide. At Solent University, we're ready for the future. Apply now at solent.ac.uk/clearing.
Headlines and breaking news 24 hours a day at Bloomberg.com, the Bloomberg Business app, and at Bloomberg Quick Take. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Sponsored by SEI. Challenges highlight one's character, partnership, and resilience. At SEI, they act as one community with their clients. Go to SEIC.com/banks. U.S. equities slumped on concern that a resurgence in coronavirus cases will derail the comeback of the world's biggest economy. Oil is down below $40 a barrel, and Treasury yields are in decline. We check the markets every 15 minutes. The S&P is down 0.9%, down 30. Dow's down 1.3%, down 348, and the Nasdaq is down 0.2%, down 17. The 10-year is up 12.30 seconds. The yield 0.62%. West Texas Intermediate crude oil is down 2.2% at $40 a barrel. COMEX gold is down 0.8% at $18.0650 an ounce. The dollar yen is at 107.26. The euro is $1.1303, and the pound $1.2624. That's a Bloomberg Business Flash. I'm Greg Jarrett. Bloomberg Balance of Power continues with David Weston on Bloomberg Radio.
This is Balance of Power on Bloomberg Television and Radio. I'm David Weston. It's time now for First Word News, and for that we go to Mark Crumpton.
David, thank you. The mayor of Seoul, Park Won-soon, has been found dead, according to the news agency Yonhap. Park has been viewed as a potential candidate for the 2022 presidential election. We'll continue to follow this story throughout the day. Florida is still being hit hard by the coronavirus. The state reported new records in both COVID-19 deaths and new hospitalizations today. 120 Floridians died in the past 24 hours. That's up from 48 the day before. And the state's positivity rate jumped to 18.4%. Florida has had more than 232,000 confirmed cases. As David and our Greg Storr were reporting moments ago, the Supreme Court today has ruled that much of eastern Oklahoma is still American Indian territory. The justices, in a 5-4 vote, sided with a convicted child molester who argued that the state lacked authority to prosecute him because his crime took place within the boundaries of the reservation. The ruling means Oklahoma prosecutors can't pursue criminal cases against American Indian defendants in parts of Oklahoma, including most of Tulsa. And the court also said a New York grand jury can get President Trump's tax returns and other financial records. But for now, it's blocked out subpoenas for those documents. That's likely to prevent their public release before the election. Justices ordered lower courts to take another look at the congressional subpoenas. The case has tested President Trump's claim to protection from criminal investigations while in office. The president responded in a tweet, quote, "This is all a political prosecution." Global news 24 hours a day on air and on Quick Take by Bloomberg, powered by more than 2,700 journalists and analysts in over 120 countries. I'm Mark Crumpton. This is Bloomberg. David?
Thank you so much, Mark. And even as Mark was reporting the news, another headline crossed the Bloomberg, and that is that the FAA now is probing Boeing's alleged pressure on designated inspectors. That, of course, is in the 737 MAX situation, which continues afoot even as they're trying to get that aircraft back up and running. So once again, FAA is probing possible pressure put on designated FAA inspectors. In the meantime, let's turn to the USMCA. President Lopez Obrador of Mexico came to Washington yesterday, and President Trump took the occasion to say that the USMCA, that's the successor to NAFTA, is the biggest and the fairest trade deal ever. We turn now to our former ambassador, U.S. former ambassador to Mexico. He is Tony Garza. So, Tony, take us into the USMCA. You know the relationships between Mexico and the United States so terribly well. How important is this agreement?
Well, I think it's a terribly important agreement, and yesterday's visit highlighted it. As is the case, David, as you know, anytime two leaders, particularly the United States and Mexico, meet, there are some political objectives, some policy ends that you hope will be addressed, and some background noise, the critics. But I think the overarching theme was the importance of USMCA at this moment. Certainly, both countries have some real challenges. With the pandemic, the COVID-19 crisis, the collapse in the economy, both in Mexico and the United States. In the U.S., we have some very serious racial issues which we're trying to address. And in Mexico, the constant concerns about security and violence. So I think this was not only a moment that both presidents wanted to focus on something positive, but also a moment to reflect on the challenges that we can perhaps go forward addressing together, not the least of which are economic growth and security. So I think in terms of the political objectives, I think they accomplished it. They exceeded expectations in terms of the tone and the essentially the pictures coming out of the meeting. Secondly, I think policy, while it's less clear, they did issue a communique. And if there's a commitment to implementation of USMCA in a timely and forward-looking fashion, I think that'll be good. And I think largely the critics today are kind of, recognizing that their hyperbole might have been misplaced.
Interesting. An awful lot of work went into this agreement. It took a matter of years involving Canada and the U.S. and Mexico. The question is there going to have to be more work done in the future? Do we get quietude? Already the United States is threatening possible tariffs on aluminum out of Canada, not Mexico, but Canada. But is there maybe bumpy roads ahead even on the trade front despite the USMCA?
Yes, David, I think you're absolutely right. As you know, we've spoken in the past, and at the conclusion of the negotiations, I made the comment that this agreement was greeted more with relief than celebration, largely because I think fundamentally Presidents Donald Trump and Lopez Obrador are not committed free traders. So the fact that we got to the end of the negotiated agreement was very good. I think as we go forward, you heard Ambassador Lighthizer comments of a couple of weeks ago. He said, we'll litigate early and often to assure compliance. What I'm hopeful is that rather than litigation, that there's negotiation around issues that are important to implementation. And I think you'll see them primarily in the labor area. The rules of origin with respect to manufacturing, I think, are going to cause some heartburn. Environmental concerns. You're already seeing that in spite of the fact that an agreement is placed, the threat of tariffs on aluminum in Canada, we are in a political cycle, so I don't anticipate it'll be all smooth sailing, but it's nice to know that the agreement is in force and there's a commitment to implementation.
How is the pandemic affecting U.S.-Mexico trade relations as a practical matter? I mean, I could see it as hurting because people do not want to have things crossing the border, or maybe helping because people would rather have things coming from Mexico than perhaps from other places. How is it affecting supply chains?
Well, initially, it was very disruptive to supply chains, and as you know, it's the level of integration between the United States, Mexico, and Canada is profound in terms of the number of times that components will cross those borders before they leave in a final product. And what you had was uneven openings in Mexico and the United States, where you had manufacturing facilities in Mexico that remained closed because of the pandemic, and those components or finished goods were not being able to move to the United States. I think one of the things that you'd like to see is better harmonization around supply chains. But there is a silver lining in this, is I think we recognize that there is an opportunity for Mexico and North America to move some of the production away from more remote areas such as China and near shore. And I think Mexico, if they do some things internally in terms of making themselves more attractive to investment, and those are domestic issues, I think there's a real opportunity going forward as it relates to supply chains. But no, certainly the pandemic has disrupted everything in terms of both the supply side and obviously because of the collapse in our economy, some of the demand side as well.
Well, what about the collapse in the economy? Because obviously the pandemic has hit Mexico the way it has hit the United States. As I understand it, you may well have like negative 10% GDP growth, a tough 21. And so what is the situation with the economy there? And does President López Obrador, embracing President Trump the way he is now, does that help him back home get some of the things done he needs to get done?
Well, yes and no. Yes, I think not so much embracing President Trump, but sending a signal about his commitment to trade. And I'm hopeful perhaps a bit of a pivot in terms of his policies in Mexico as relates to attracting capital, providing more certainty and rule of law around investments. As you know, there was some fairly dramatic energy reform several years ago in Mexico, and this president has stepped away from the commitment to reform in the energy space. And I think that's a very important one for President López Obrador to reassess in terms of energy. They've also got to look at how they are going to not only position themselves vis-a-vis China, but further integration into this North American platform. And I think in that sense, López Obrador has shown what many would characterize as a hostility to capital, or a lack of complete understanding of how important it is. So I think this is an important moment, but it's all in the going forward in terms of the implementation of the agreement and what the President López Obrador will do domestically to respect rule of law and make the country more attractive to investment.
So briefly here at the end, Tony, in a nutshell, what is the plan for growing the economy? Because right now, Pemex and the energy industry has been terribly important. Oil prices are nowhere, goodness knows. So what's the plan? If it's not energy, what is it?
Well, that's been less clear. And that's been the biggest criticism of the president, that in the wake, the pandemic only exacerbated some underlying realities. And that was that there was no growth, that there was security concerns, and that this president didn't have a clear sense of where he wanted to take the economy. That's still not clear. And I think the holdout USMCA as sort of a magic wand is misplaced. And I think President López Obrador is doing a little bit of that now. What he's got to do is say, I'm committed to trade, I'm committed to USMCA, energy has a place in, and recognize that his nostalgia for a day gone by where Pemex was the big engine down there is no longer the reality of global energy market. So there's a lot that has to be, I think that he's got to take a serious look at how he's approaching competitiveness in his own country. And it's not clear if he's yet willing to do that.
Always really helpful to get your perspective on these things. That's former U.S. Ambassador to Mexico, Tony Garza. He's now of counsel to White & Case.